Story 1. Look out. The radio said my own name back to me, and I was not the one who had spoken it. I had the handset halfway to my mouth. I remember that. I remember my thumb was on the transmit bar, and I had not pressed it yet, because a lookout learns fast that you do not talk over the district. You wait your turn, and I was waiting. And out of the little speaker, in a voice that was mine down to the way I drag on the back half of a word when I am tired, the radio said, "Lookout 9, clear and quiet, no smoke, no traffic." That was my line. That was the exact thing I said every night at the same time, word for word. The flat little report I had given the district 90-some nights running that season, and I had not said it. My thumb was still resting on the bar, dry, unmoved, and something down the trees below the tower had already said it for me, in my voice, into a radio I was holding in my own hand. I want to back up. If I just start here, you will think I am the kind of man who hears things, and I am not, or I was not, and it matters that you understand the difference before I take you the rest of the way up that mountain. My name is Wade Bishop. That summer I was 51 years old, and I had been a seasonal fire lookout on the Cutter Ridge Tower for 6 years running, which in that line of work makes you an old-timer. Most people do one season. They come up thinking it is going to be a poet's life, a lot of coffee and a lot of sunsets, and by the third week the quiet has gone into them like a splinter, and they are counting the days. The good ones last a summer. I had done 6. Before that I had spent 22 years driving a route truck for a bread company out of Bristol, up and down the same stretch of Tennessee and Virginia highway 5 days a week, backing into the same loading docks, nodding at the same store managers. It is not a story. It is just a job, and it was a decent one. And then my wife Carol got sick. The winter I turned 44 and was gone. By the spring I turned 45. And after that, the bread route stopped feeling like a life and started feeling like a hallway I was walking down, waiting to get to the end of. I do not say that for sympathy. I say it because a man who takes a job alone on a mountain for the whole fire season is a particular kind of man, and you should know what particular kind I was. I was a man who had gotten comfortable with quiet in the worst way, the way you get comfortable with a limp. The lookout job did not scare me the way it scares most people. The alone part was the part I wanted. That is the truth, and it is not a flattering one. Cutter Ridge sits at a little over 4,000 feet in a stretch of national forest along the Tennessee and North Carolina line. Up above, a drainage they call the Sink, because the fog pools in it and does not leave until noon most mornings, and some mornings not at all. The tower is an old one, 1934, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps boys, one of the last of the true wooden cab towers still standing in that district. Most of them are steel now, or gone, or automated with a camera that never gets lonely and never files a false report and never quits in July. Cutter Ridge kept its lookout because the camera coverage in that drainage was bad, too much ridge in the way, and because a live set of eyes in that particular spot had caught 2 bad fires early in the 80s, and the district had a long memory about it. The cab was 14 feet by 14 feet, sitting on a wooden tower about 40 feet up, with a catwalk running all the way around the outside and windows on all 4 walls so you could see the whole horizon without moving your feet. In the center of the floor was the Osborne Firefinder, which is a brass and metal ring on a stand with a map of the district under glass, and you use it to shoot a bearing on a smoke. Around the walls I had a cot, a 2-burner propane stove, a little table, a stool with a shortwave, and shelves for my food and books. The tower had no running water. I hauled it up in jugs from a spring a quarter-mile down the access trail. There was no power except a bank of solar and a deep cycle battery that ran the radio and 1 lamp. There was no cell signal. There has never been cell signal on Cutter Ridge, and I hope there never is. The radio was the whole world up there. You have to understand that. The district frequency was the only thread that connected me to another human voice, and the schedule of it became the shape of my days. Morning check-in at 0600, a weather observation at 1000, sometimes traffic through the day, other lookouts calling in smokes, The dispatcher passing along a lightning forecast, or a road closure, or just chatter between the towers on a slow afternoon, which the district frowned on, but everyone did anyway, because we were all alone up there, and a human voice is a human voice. And then the evening check, 2100 hours, 9 at night. Lookout 9, clear and quiet, no smoke, no traffic. Then I would set the handset down, and that was the last voice I would hear until morning. 6 years I did that. And the thing I have to make you believe before I tell you the rest is that for 5.5 of those years, nothing happened. Nothing. I want that on the record. I was not a man primed to see a ghost behind every tree. I had spent more nights alone on that mountain than most people spend anywhere, and I had learned the ordinary catalog of it. I knew the sound a bear makes working the underbrush at the base of the tower, which is a big careless sound, nothing sneaky in it. I knew the barred owls that called across the sink at dusk, the ones that sound like a question, who cooks for you, who cooks for you all. I knew the way the tower itself talked at night, the wood ticking as it cooled, the guy wires humming in a wind, the particular groan of the third step from the top that I could have picked out of 100 steps. I knew my mountain. That is the whole point. I knew it. And then in the back half of my 6th season, it started to be a mountain I did not know, and it happened so slowly that I did not have a single night I could point to and say, that was the night it started. But if you held a gun on me, I would say it started with the check-ins. So let me tell you about the check-ins. It was late July, the middle of a bad dry spell, the kind that makes a lookout earn his pay, humidity down in the teens and the whole forest gone, the color of a paper bag. I had been up since before dawn, watching for smoke, and I was tired, in the specific way that job makes you tired, which is not a muscle tired, but an eye tired, a staring tired. And I keyed the handset at 9 on the dot and gave my report and set it down. And about 10 seconds later, the radio said it again. Lookout 9, clear and quiet, no smoke, no traffic. My own voice, my own words, 10 seconds after I had said them. Now, the first thing I did was not what you would expect. I did not jump up. I did not feel a cold hand on my neck. What I felt was annoyance, because the obvious explanation, the only explanation a reasonable man reaches for, is that the district repeated my transmission back somehow, an echo on the repeater, a stuck relay, some gremlin in 40-year-old equipment. That happens. Radios do strange things. So I keyed up and I said, District, Lookout 9, you copy a double on my check. And the dispatcher that night, a young woman named Reyes, who I liked because she never wasted words, came back and said, Lookout 9, District, negative. I copied you once, 5 by 5. You got a problem with your set? I looked at the handset in my hand. I said, negative. I thought I heard a double. Probably me. 9 clear. District clear, she said. And that was that. I sat on my stool and I told myself it was the equipment, and I mostly believed it the way you can mostly believe a thing at 9 at night that you cannot believe at all at 3 in the morning. Because here's the part that kept me up. Reyes had only heard me once. So the second report, the echo, the double, had not gone out over the air at all. It had come out of my speaker without ever going out over the district, which meant it was not an echo of a transmission. It was a sound in my cab that had chosen to arrive through the one speaker in the room. And I sat with that for a long time before I made myself lie down. I did not sleep well, but I want to be honest with you about the shape of it, because this is where a lot of these accounts go wrong, where the man tells you he knew right away that something was hunting him, and that is never how it goes. You do not know right away. You explain it. You are so good at explaining it that you will explain your own death if it comes slow enough. I explained the double. I explained the next thing too. The next thing was 3 nights later. I had gotten in the habit, those 6 years of a little routine before the evening check. Around 8:30 I would step out onto the catwalk on the east side with a cup of coffee and watch the light go out of the sink. The fog coming up out of the drainage the way it did, filling the low ground first and rising, and I would say a couple of words out loud to nobody. Not a prayer, just talk. A man alone for 4 months talks to himself, or he stops being able to. That is a real thing, and I had learned to let myself do it. That night I stood on the catwalk and I said out loud the way I did, well, another one down. Just that. Another one down, meaning another day. It was a thing I said. I had probably said it 300 times up there over the years. And from down in the trees, from the black wall of them at the base of the tower where the fog had not yet reached, a voice said, another one down. Not an echo. An echo comes back fainter, and it comes back off the far ridge from the direction you threw the sound, and it comes back with the shape of the distance in it. This came from below me and close, from the near trees, and it came back at the same volume I had used, in the same voice, with the same little tired fall on the word down that I had put on it. It was not the mountain giving my words back to me. It was something at the bottom of my tower that had heard me say a thing and had said it back to see how it fit in its mouth. I did not move for a long time. The coffee went cold in the cup. I stood on the catwalk with my hands on the rail, and I looked down into the trees, and I could not see anything, because it was that hour when the light is going and the shapes down in the woods stop being trees and start being the spaces between trees. And any one of those spaces could have had something standing in it, and I would not have known. I told myself it was another lookout. I told myself a hiker had come up the access trail and was playing a joke. I told myself a dozen things, and every one of them died the same death, because there was no other lookout within 9 miles, and no hiker comes up a lookout access trail at 8:30 at night in a bad fire year when the whole forest is posted closed. And even if he did, he would not answer me in my own voice. I went inside and I did the evening check early at 8:45 instead of 9, which was against the schedule, and I said my report fast and quiet, and I did not say anything else out loud. And when I set the handset down, the cab was dead silent, and I noticed, the way you notice a thing you have been ignoring, that the barred owls had not called that evening, not once. And I sat and I tried to remember the last time I had heard them, and I could not, and that scared me worse than the voice had, because the voice was a thing that had happened, and the owls were a thing that had stopped happening, and a wrong absence is worse than a wrong presence. A wrong presence you can look at. A wrong absence just sits there under everything, and you feel it the way you feel a step that is not there in the dark. I need to tell you the rule now, because it was around this time that I made it, and everything after this is about the rule, about keeping it, and about the one time I broke it. The rule was this: I would only answer. I would never call first. I came to it sideways, the way you come to most of the true things. I had noticed something about the double check, the first night, the thing that Reyes never heard. It had come after I spoke, 10 seconds after. And the voice in the trees, another one down, that had come after I spoke too. Whatever it was not a talker, it was a repeater. It did not have words of its own that I had heard yet. It had my words, and it gave them back, and to give them back it needed me to say them first. So I got a cold little idea in my head, and it was the kind of idea that keeps a man alive without him understanding why, and the idea was, do not feed it, do not give it new words to eat. Answer the district, because you have to. Because that is the job, and because Reyes is a real woman at a real desk in Elizabethton, and that thread is the only thing keeping you a person. But past that, out on the mountain, in the dark, do not initiate. Do not call out to see if it is there. Do not say hello to the trees. Do not push transmit on your handset to talk to yourself for company the way you used to. Let it be the one that speaks first. Make it come to you. Because I had started to feel, and I could not have told you why, that the danger was not in it having my voice. The danger was in me giving it more of me. Every word it took, it kept. And I had a bad picture in my head, a picture I could not shake, of the thing at the bottom of my tower slowly filling up with me, one line at a time, until it had enough of me to be me. And I thought, if I stop feeding it, it stops growing. It can only ever say back what I have already said. And if I am careful, if I am disciplined, I can starve it down to the few lines it already has, and it will stay small, and I will get to the end of the season and go down the mountain and never come back to Cutter Ridge. That was the plan. Answer, never call. I even wrote it on the wall by the door, small, in pencil, where nobody would see it but me. Answer, do not call. And I want to tell you, it held for a while. It did. For most of 2 weeks it held. And those 2 weeks were the strangest of my life, because I lived them under a discipline of silence that I have to try hard to describe. I stopped talking to myself. That was the hardest part, and it does not sound hard. 6 years of a habit, the little narration a lonely man runs under his own days, and I cut it off cold. I made my coffee without saying. There we go. I glassed the sink at dawn without saying, come on, show me. When I dropped a can of beans on the floor, I did not curse. I just picked it up. And the quiet built up in me like water behind a dam, and I could feel it wanting out, and I understood for the first time in my life why solitary confinement breaks men, because it was not the alone that was breaking me. It was the not being allowed to make a sound in the alone. That is a different thing. That is a worse thing. And the whole time I was keeping the rule, the thing was testing the walls of it. It would wait until I had almost forgotten, and then it would give me back a line. Old lines. Lines I had said days before. I would be lying on my cot at 2 in the morning, and out of the trees, faint, would come my own voice saying, District, look out 9. Weather observation. A line from a 1000 OBS 3 days back. It had kept it. It was showing me it had kept it. And then a night later, come on, show me, in my voice. The dawn line I used to say and had stopped saying, thrown back at me at 3 in the morning like a card laid on a table. Look what I have. Look what you gave me before you got smart. I did not answer. That was the discipline. Whatever it said, I did not answer. Because to answer was to give it the next line, and the next line was mine, and I was not giving away any more of me. I would lie on the cot and listen to it work through its little collection of my voice in the dark, my own words coming up out of the black trees in an order I had never said them in, and I would breathe slow, and I would not make a sound, and eventually it would stop, and the not stopping was the thing I waited for every night. The moment it ran out of me and went quiet, because that quiet was the sound of the rule working. It could not make new words. It only had what I had fed it, and I had stopped feeding it. I called the district less. I want to mention that because it matters later. I cut my radio to the bare minimum the job allowed, the required check-ins, and the required OBS, and nothing else. No chatter. No slow afternoon talk with the other towers. Because I had started to be afraid of the radio too. The radio was a place my voice came out of, and the thing lived where my voice came out of, and I did not like how those two facts sat next to each other. Reyes noticed. She was sharp. About 10 days into my silence, she held me on the frequency after a check, and she said, 9, you all right up there? You've gone quiet on me. Usually can't get you to shut up about the weather. And she meant it kind. It was a joke, and I stood there with the handset in my hand, and I wanted so badly to tell her. I wanted to say, Reyes, there is something on my mountain that has my voice, and it is learning me. I had the words all lined up, and I did not say them. And do you know why I did not say them? Because the thing was listening. It was always listening. The radio was open, and my voice was going out over it. And if I said those words out loud into the handset in my voice, then I would have said them, and it would have them. And I did not know what it would do with them, but I knew I did not want to find out what my own fear sounded like coming up out of the trees at 3 in the morning in my own voice. So I said, "I'm fine, Reyes. Just tired. Long dry season." And she said, "Roger that. Go easy, 9." And I said, "9 clear." And I set the handset down, and I sat on my stool, and I put my face in my hands, and I did not make a sound. Here is a thing about being alone that people who have not done it do not know. Loneliness is not the absence of company. Loneliness is the presence of a listener you cannot satisfy, and I had one now. I had the best listener a lonely man ever had. It hung on every word I said. It kept them all. It gave them back to me at night like gifts. "Look, I remembered this one. This is your favorite." And the horror of it, the real horror underneath the fear, was that some sick, starved part of me was glad of the attention. That is a thing I have never said to anyone. Some part of me, by the 3rd week of my silence, missed the sound of my own voice coming up out of the trees, because it was the only voice on the mountain that was interested in me. Reyes was doing a job. The thing in the trees was doing something else. It wanted me. Nothing had wanted me since Carol died. I am telling you that because you have to understand it to understand what I did. I did not break the rule out of carelessness. I broke it out of loneliness, which is the oldest way there is to die in the woods. It was the 2nd week of August. The dry spell had broken a little. We had gotten a wet system through, and with the fire danger down for a few days, the whole district relaxed, and the radio got chatty again. The other lookouts trading stories in the afternoon, and I sat and listened to it and did not join in, and felt the quiet in me straining at the dam. And that night, after the evening check, I stepped out on the catwalk with my coffee for the first time in weeks, because the wet system had cleared and the stars were out over the sink the way they only get out on a mountain with no lights for 40 miles in any direction. And it was so beautiful, and I was so alone with it, that before I even knew my mouth was moving, I said out loud, soft, "Carol, you should see this." And I heard myself say it, and my whole body went cold, because I had broken the rule. I had said a new thing, a thing it had never heard. Her name. I had given it her name. I stood without moving. I waited. The trees were quiet. A minute went by, and I started to think maybe it had not heard, maybe the wind was wrong, maybe I had gotten away with it. And then, from down in the black trees at the base of the tower, in my own voice, soft with the exact ache I had put in it, it said, "Carol, you should see this." And then, before I could breathe, before I could even understand what I was hearing, it said the thing I had never said. It made a new line, the first new line in 3 weeks. It said, in my voice, in a tone I did not recognize because it was not a tone I had used, it said, "Wade, come down and see. My name, come down and see." I had never said those words in that order in my life. It had built them. Out of the pieces I had fed it, out of Wade from my check-ins and come and down and see from 100 casual sentences, it had assembled a thing I had never said, and it had said it in my voice, and it was calling me down the tower into the dark. I did not go. I want that clear. I am not the man in the story who goes down the tower. I went inside and I shut the door, and I sat on my cot with my back against the wall and my knees up, and I stayed there until the sky went gray, and all night, at intervals from below, in my own voice, it said it again, "Wade, come down and see. Wade, come down and see." Patient, never angry, never loud. Just a man calling another man down out of a tower, all night, in that man's own voice. And the man was me. Both of us were me. And I sat against the wall, and I bit down on my own hand to keep from answering, because every time it said "come down," I felt the pull of it in my legs. The awful, reasonable pull. "Come down, Wade. You have been up here so long. Come down and see." Morning came. It stopped. It always stopped at first light. I had learned that much. Whatever it was a night thing. It did not like the day. And in the gray light I made myself get up, and I made coffee, and my hands were shaking, and I keyed the 600 check-in, And Reyes came back bright and ordinary from her warm desk in Elizabethton, and I have never in my life been so glad to hear another human voice. And I gave my report, and I did not say anything else, and I made a new rule to sit on top of the old one, and the new rule was, get off this mountain. It was not that simple, and I knew it was not, and here is where I have to explain the thing that keeps me up worse than any of the rest of it. I could not just leave. A lookout who abandons his post in a fire year does not just lose the job. In a bad drought with the whole forest posted closed and the danger high, a tower going dark is a real thing, an emergency, and they would send someone up to find out why, and I would either have to lie to that someone or tell that someone the truth. And there was no version of the truth I could say into a radio or a phone that would not sound like a man who had cracked up alone on a mountain, which I was starting to think might just be exactly what I was. Because I want to be fair to myself here, and I want to be fair to you. There was a version of all this where I had come unglued. 6 years alone, a dead wife I still talk to, the specific loneliness of that job. It happens to lookouts. It has a name in the old journals. They used to call it the Tower Fever, and the district knew about it and watched for it. And a man who called in and said, "There is a voice in my trees," would be a man they came and got gently and put somewhere with other people and a lot of light. And some nights, lying against that wall, I hoped that was all it was. I hoped I was crazy. Crazy you can fix. But I did not think I was crazy, and here is why, and this is the detail I have never been able to explain away. The owls. The barred owls had not called since the night of the another one down, weeks now. And a crazy man does not unhear owls. A crazy man adds things, he does not subtract them. My broken mind might have invented a voice in the trees. It would not have gone into the forest and told every owl in a 2-mile radius to hush. Something real had done that. Something real had moved into the sink below my tower, and the whole living forest had gone quiet around it, the way a room goes quiet when a certain man walks in. And I had been so busy listening to my own voice come up out of the dark that I had almost missed the bigger and worse fact, which was that everything else had stopped making noise at all. The mountain had been full of sound for 6 years, and now the only sound on it was me, and the thing that was me, calling back and forth in the dark, in an empty forest that had cleared out around us like a schoolyard clears out around a fight. So I made my plan to leave, and I made it careful, because I still had the rule, and the rule had kept me alive, and I was not going to get sloppy at the end. I had 6 days until the district's supply and relief cycle. Every 2 weeks, a fellow named Doyle came up the access road in a green Forest Service truck with my water and my food and my mail, and he would stay an hour and we would talk, a real man, in daylight, and then he would go back down. Doyle was due in 6 days. My plan was to hold, to keep the rule, to answer and never call, to make no new sound in the dark for 6 more nights, and when Doyle came up I would go down with him. I would tell him I was sick. That part was even true. I would ride down in the green truck in the daylight with another living man, and I would not come back. And whatever the thing in the trees did after that, whatever it did with the collection of my voice it had built, it could do it to an empty tower. 6 nights. I want to walk you through them fast because they were all the same night. I would do the evening check at 9, careful, only the report, nothing else. I would set the handset down. I would sit against the wall, and at some point in the dark it would start. Wade, come down and see. And I would not answer, and it would go on, patient, all night, my own voice calling me down. And toward the end of the 6 nights it started to add things. It had gotten better at building. It would say, "Wade, come down and see. It's all right. Come down." And once, the 4th night, in Carol's cadence, but in my voice, it said, "I miss you. Come down." And I put my hands over my ears like a child, and I still heard it, because it was not really coming through the air anymore by then, or it was. But it had also gotten into the place behind my ears where you hear your own thoughts, and that is the closest I can come to telling you what the last few nights were like. It was not out in the trees anymore. It was learning to come from inside the tower. It was learning to come from inside me. On the 5th day, in the daylight, I did a thing I had been putting off, and it is the one piece of this whole business I have that you could hold in your hand if I had kept it, which I did not. I went down to the spring. I had been out of water for a day and a half, rationing the last jug, because going down the access trail to the spring meant going down among the trees, and the trees were where it lived, and even in daylight I did not want to be down there. But a man has to drink, and it was the middle of a bright hot morning, and the day thing had never bothered me, so I took my 2 empty jugs and I went down the trail to the spring. The spring came up out of a rock face into a little stone catch basin the Corps boys had built back in the 30s, same as the tower, and there was a flat place there, always damp, always soft, where the overflow ran off into the ferns. In 6 years I had learned that damp flat like the back of my hand. It was where I filled my jugs. It held a print. My own boot prints were always in it, coming and going, and the prints of the deer that used the spring at night, and now and then a bear, and once a bobcat, and I knew all of them. That morning the damp flat had a print in it that was not any of those. It was a foot, a bare human foot, or the shape of one, pressed deep into the soft ground beside the basin, facing the trail, facing up toward the tower, longer than mine, and I am not a small man. The toes were wrong, too long, and there were the right number of them, which somehow made it worse. 5 toes, a heel, an arch, a human foot in every particular except the size and a certain thinness to it, like the foot of a man who had been made narrow, and it was pressed in deep, deeper than a walking man presses, the way you press when you stand in one spot a long time, shifting your weight, waiting, just the one, just the single print, facing the tower, at the edge of the water I drank from, and no others anywhere around it, no trail of them coming or going, one bare footprint alone in the mud, like the thing had been set down there out of the air. I filled my jugs. I did not run. I made myself not run. I filled both jugs from the basin with that print 18 inches from my knee, and I climbed back up the trail to the tower at a walk, and I did not look back. And when I got to the top, I sat on my stool and shook for an hour. And here is the part I have never gotten around, the part I turn over at 3 in the morning. The print was fresh. The overflow from the spring runs steady, and soft ground by running water does not hold a print long. It slumps and fills. A day at the outside. That print had been made that morning in the daylight. While I sat up in my tower thinking the daylight was mine. It had never only been a night thing. I had told myself it was a night thing because the daylight was the only thing I had left to believe in. But it had come to the spring in the morning and stood there in the mud, looking up at my tower, and then it had gone and left me the one print to find. The way it left me, the lines at night, look, I was here. I am always closer than you think. I did not go back to the spring after that. I drank the 2 jugs slow over the last days, and when they ran out, I drank rain. I caught in a pot off the catwalk, and I was thirsty at the end, but I was not going back down among the trees, not for anything, because I had learned the last lesson the mountain had to teach me, which was that there was no safe hour. There had never been a safe hour. There was only me thinking there was. The 6th night was the worst, and it was also, I found out later, the night everything I thought I understood turned out to be backwards. It did not calm me down that night. That was the first wrong thing. I sat against the wall, braced for it. 6 nights of it had trained me to brace, and the dark came, and the trees stayed quiet. No wade, no come down, nothing. And you would think that would be a relief, and instead it was the worst thing yet, because I had gotten used to the shape of the danger, and now the shape had changed, and a changed danger is worse than a bad one, you know. Around midnight the radio came on, not the district. There was no 600 yet, no traffic. It was the dead middle of the night when the frequency is silent for hours. The radio came on by itself, the little squelch breaking the way it does when someone keys up somewhere out on the mountain, and out of the speaker, clear, 5 by 5, closer than any signal from a base station 40 miles away has any right to be. My own voice said, "District, Lookout 9, evening check. Clear and quiet. No smoke, no traffic. 9 clear." It had never used the radio before. It had always come through the trees, through the air, from outside. Now it was on the frequency. Now it was transmitting. It had learned the radio the way it had learned my voice, patiently, from listening to me use it night after night. And now it was doing what I did. It was checking in. It was reporting to the district in my voice. And I sat there in the dark with the cold running all the way down through me, because I understood finally, all at once, what it had been building toward. And it was not to call me down the tower. It was to replace me on the radio. It was learning to be the lookout. I grabbed the handset. I broke every rule I had. I keyed up, and I said, "District, Lookout 9. Do you copy? I need. District, come in." And I did not even know what I was going to say. I just knew I could not let that thing be the only Lookout 9 on the frequency. I had to prove I was still here. I had to be the real one. And the radio was silent. The district does not always man the desk in the dead middle of the night, in the off hours. And I keyed again and again and got nothing. And then, while my thumb was still on the bar, over my own transmission, in my own voice, calm as a Sunday, it said, "District copies, Lookout 9. Go easy up there, Wade." And then the frequency went dead, and I sat in the dark holding a handset that would not answer me, and I understood that I had just spent the last of my discipline. I had called first. I had fed it a whole panicked mouthful of me. "Do you copy and I need?" And come in. And it had eaten every word and used them to answer me in the district's role. And now there were 2 Lookout 9s on Cutter Ridge, and only one of us could reach the district, and it was not me. I did not sleep. When the gray came, I keyed the 600 check with a dry mouth, and for a long, long moment there was nothing, and I thought, it has taken the frequency, it has cut me off. And then Reyes came on, ordinary, warm, real, and I could have wept. She was there. It was daytime. It could not do daytime. I gave my report and I held her on the line. I said, "Reyes, is Doyle coming up today, the relief? Is he on schedule?" And she said, "Should be. 9. He rolled out of the yard about an hour ago. You expecting something?" And I said, "No. Just ready for the mail." And she laughed and said, "Aren't you all?" And cleared. And I sat and watched the access road through the south window, and I waited for the green truck like a man waiting for the tide to come in and carry him off a sandbar. Doyle came up a little after 10. I heard the truck on the road before I saw it, the low grind of it in the switchbacks, the most beautiful sound I had heard in weeks. An engine, a man, the daylight world coming up my mountain to get me. I was down the tower stairs before he had the truck stopped. 40 feet of stairs. I usually took slow because of my knees, and I took them like a young man. And I met the truck in the little gravel turnaround at the base, and Doyle rolled his window down and looked at me, and his face did a thing I did not understand at the time and understand too well now. He looked confused, and then he looked afraid, and then he tried to hide both. "Wade," he said. "You're, Doyle," I said. "God, am I glad to see you. Listen, I need to go down with you, today. I'm sick. I've been sick. I can't finish the season. I'll deal with the district, but I need to ride down with you right now, all right?" And Doyle sat in his truck and did not open the door and looked at me the way you look at a man you were told was one place and have found in another, and he said, "Slow, Wade. Buddy, he already went down." I did not understand him. I said, "What are you talking about?" "I'm right here." And Doyle told me the thing that I have carried every day since, and he told it carefully, watching me the whole time, one hand not quite on the gear shift. 2 days ago, he said, Lookout 9 had called the district in the middle of the afternoon and asked to be relieved. Said he was sick, said he could not finish the season. The voice on the radio had been mine, Doyle said. He had been in the dispatch office when it came through and heard it himself, It had been Wade Bishop, no question, tired and a little strange, but Wade. And the district had said, "Understood. Hold tight. We will get someone up to relieve you." And the voice had said, "No need. I will walk down to the trailhead and catch a ride. Do not send anyone up. I will meet the road." And that afternoon a man had come down off the Cutter Ridge Trail to the little gravel lot where the access road meets the county road, and a district hand named Petty had picked him up, and the man had been me. Petty knew me. Petty had driven me before. Petty had put Wade Bishop in his truck 2 days ago and driven him down the mountain to Elizabethton and dropped him at the district office, and Wade Bishop had signed out of the season, signed the paper in Wade Bishop's own hand, and turned in his keys and walked off toward the bus station, and nobody had thought a thing of it because it was Wade. It was exactly Wade. It had my face and my voice and my slow way of talking, and it signed my name. On paper, the tower had been empty for 2 days. Wade Bishop had resigned, signed out, gone home. That was the office's version, sitting in a basket, waiting to be filed for the off-season. And this is the part that Doyle and I worried at for a long time after, because it is the seam where the whole thing hangs together and the resignation had not caught up to the frequency yet. A lookout does not resign by walking off a mountain often, and when he does, the word takes days to work its way from the office paperwork out to the dispatchers who actually key the radio. And Reyes worked the day desk and had not gotten that word. So Reyes had kept right on answering my 600 checks every morning. Bright and ordinary. Lookout 9 clear. Because as far as Reyes knew, I was still up there. And I was. That is why she was still taking my morning calls 2 days after I had supposedly signed out and gone home. But nobody was manning the night desk anymore, because the night desk on a single tower gets cut the moment that tower closes out for the season, and on paper my tower had closed out. So the nights had gone dark and silent on the office end, which is why, on that 6th night, when the thing keyed my frequency in my voice, and I keyed back and screamed for the district, there was no one there to hear either one of us. The office had 2 facts that did not touch. Wade Bishop resigned. Lookout 9 still checking in every morning. And in the gap between those 2 facts, in the 2 days nobody reconciled them, the thing did its work. Doyle had driven up today only to close out the cab, to haul down my gear and lock the shutters for the off-season, and he had come up the road expecting an empty tower and found me standing at the bottom of it, 40 feet of stairs in 6 years of my life, saying I was still here, and I could see in his face that he did not know which of us to believe. The one 2 days ago that had my face and did the sensible thing and signed the paper and went home, or the one in front of him now, unshaven and shaking and wild-eyed, saying that one was not real. I have thought about it every day. It never wanted to call me down the tower. I had that exactly backwards. Come down and see was never a trap to get me into the trees. It was practice. It was rehearsal. It had spent all summer learning to be me, learning my voice and my words and my radio, learning the shape of the days, and the last thing it needed, the final piece, was to learn how a lookout leaves. So it practiced leaving on me. Wade, come down and see. It was not calling me into the dark. It was learning how to walk down out of the tower into the world as a man. And once it had that, once it could do the daylight thing, the signing and the ride and the bus, it did not need me down in the trees at all. It just needed me gone. It went down the mountain in my place, in broad daylight, in my face, and did the one thing I had been too disciplined to do, the thing my rule had made me too afraid to do. It left. It left first. It called first, in the end, in the only way that mattered. It called the district and asked to go home, and it went, and it left the real one up here to rot. I did not go back up the tower. I got in Doyle's truck. I did not give him a choice about it. I just got in the passenger side and shut the door and said, "Drive, please." And God bless Doyle, he drove. Even not knowing what he was driving down the mountain, he drove. And as we pulled out of the turnaround and swung onto the access road, I looked back up at the cab one time, the old wooden cab up on its 40 feet of tower against the sky, and the radio in my pack on the floor of Doyle's truck, which I had grabbed on my way down without thinking. The handheld unit I carried, that radio came on. The squelch broke, and in my voice from the tower we were driving away from, calm and clear and going nowhere, it said, "Lookout 9, clear and quiet, no smoke, no traffic, the evening report." At 10 in the morning, in my voice from the empty tower, checking in, as if the day had ended, as if it were 9 at night, as if it had gotten the times a little wrong because it did not really understand time. It only understood the lines, and it was up there now, saying the lines to nobody. The last of me it had kept running the report over an empty mountain, and it will keep running it, I think. It is up there right now, checking in, clear and quiet, no smoke, no traffic, and there is nobody left on Cutter Ridge to answer. Doyle did not say anything for the first few miles. The road down off Cutter Ridge is 9 miles of switchbacks, and he drove all of them at about 15 an hour with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set. And I sat with the handheld radio in my lap and did not turn it off because I could not make my hands do it. And about every mile or so it would come on and say a line, one of my lines in my voice from the mountain going away behind us, and each time it was a little fainter as the ridge got between us and the tower, and each time Doyle's shoulders would come up around his ears a little more, and I understood that he was hearing it too, that this was the mercy I had been praying for without knowing it, that whatever this was, Doyle could hear it, which meant I was not crazy, which meant it was real, which meant everything I had lived through up there was a thing that had happened in the world, and not just in my head. I have never been so grateful to be told that a nightmare was true. When we finally came down out of the last switchback and the ridge dropped away behind us and the county road opened up flat and ordinary in front of us, with a gas station and a church and a man mowing a lawn, the radio went quiet and stayed quiet, and Doyle pulled over onto the gravel shoulder and put the truck in park and sat there with his hands on the wheel. And after a while he said, "Wade, I have known you 6 years. That was you talking, back there, on the radio. I would swear to it in a court. That was your voice." "I know," I said, "but you're sitting right here." "I know," I said. And he looked at me and he said, the thing that neither of us has ever been able to get past, the thing that turned it from a haunting into something worse. And he said, "Then who did I not think twice about? Who signed the paper? Because that is the part. The version that went down the mountain 2 days before me did not vanish into the trees. It did not dissolve at first light. I got in Petty's truck and rode to town and signed my name to a Forest Service form and turned in my keys and walked off toward the bus station in the daylight world full of people, and not one person who saw it that day thought anything was wrong. Because it was me. It was completely and perfectly me. More me than I looked right then, unshaven and shaking in Doyle's truck. It had my whole life to walk into. My little rented house in Bristol with the key under the 3rd flower pot, my truck in the driveway, my bank, my name, Carol's picture on the dresser. It had spent all summer learning to be Wade Bishop, and then it had gone home to be Wade Bishop, and the real one, the leftover one, was riding shotgun in a Forest Service pickup with no keys and no proof, and a story no sane person would believe. I did not go home. You understand why I did not go home. I have never gone back to that house. For all I know, it is still there in it, sitting in my chair, making my coffee, being me, better at it than I was. I stayed with Doyle a few nights, and then with a cousin over in Johnson City, and I let the season close out on paper the way it had already closed out. Wade Bishop resigned, signed, and filed, and I did not fight it, because to fight it, I would have had to walk into a district office and say, "I am the real one, and there is a false one living my life." And I knew exactly how that goes. I had known all summer. That is a man they come and get, gently, and put somewhere with a lot of light. I check sometimes. That is the loop I cannot close, and the reason I still do not sleep right. I drive by the house in Bristol once in a while, in the daytime, slow, and I look. And sometimes the truck is gone and the place looks empty, and I think, all right, it moved on. It went somewhere else to be somebody else. It is done with Wade Bishop. And other times the truck is in the driveway and the kitchen light is on in the evening, and one time, I saw a shape move across the window, a man's shape, my shape, going about the ordinary business of a weeknight in my house. And I sat in my parked car across the street with my heart going, and I did not get out because I did not know what I would say to it, and worse, I did not know what it would say to me, because whatever came out of its mouth would be in my voice, and it would be reasonable, and it would be calm, and it might even be kind. And I was afraid that if I stood on that porch and it looked at me through the screen door and said, in my own tired voice, "Wade, come in and see," I was afraid that this time, after everything, I would go. There is a thing that happens now, in the ordinary world, that I do not know how to file. My bank account still moves. I closed everything I could. I opened new accounts under a middle name I never use. I did what a man does when his identity is stolen, because that is the only word the daylight world has for this. Identity theft. And it is not the word, but it is the one that lets me fill out the forms. But the old account, the Wade Bishop account, the one it had, still moves. Small things. A utility payment, a grocery charge, a withdrawal at a machine in Bristol on a Tuesday. I get the alerts because I never fully closed it, because some sick part of me needs to know, the same part that drives past the house. It is living. It is paying bills and buying food and living my life on a Tuesday, carefully, quietly, the way I lived it, and it has never once made a mistake that would let me prove to a soul that the man spending that money is not me, because it is me. That is the whole horror of it, and I cannot make anyone feel it. There is no crime here. Nothing was taken that a police report can name. A man came down off a mountain and went home, and is living his life, and everything checks out, and his name is Wade Bishop, and his face is my face. And the only person on earth who knows he is not the real one is a man with no keys and no proof, and a middle name he never used to use. And once, in the fall, a letter came to my cousin's house in Johnson City, forwarded from the Bristol address by some clerical accident, a piece of mail that had slipped through. It was addressed to me in my own handwriting. I know my own hand. I had written my own name and my cousin's address on that envelope in my own careful block letters, except I had never written it. I had never known that address until I fled to it. And inside was a single sheet of paper, blank, folded neat in thirds, and nothing else. I have thought about what a blank page means. I have decided it means the same thing the empty check-ins mean, the same thing the one bare footprint in the mud meant. It means, look. It means, I know where you are. It means, I can reach you, and I am choosing, for now, not to. I burned the letter. I did not burn the envelope. I do not know why I kept the envelope. It is in a drawer, my own name in my own hand, and some nights I take it out and look at it and I put it back and I do not sleep. I have one more thing, and then I am done. About a month after all this, when the season would have ended anyway, I called the district, not to explain. I am past explaining. I called, and I asked Reyes, who did not know any of it, who just knew me as a voice on a frequency. I asked her a small thing. I asked her to check the logs. I said I was doing paperwork closing out, and I wanted the record of my check-ins from the last 2 weeks of the season. And she pulled them, and she read them off to me, dates and times, all present, all in order. Lookout 9, reporting clear and quiet night after night, every single night, no gaps, right up through the last night of the assigned season, weeks after I had come down off that mountain in Doyle's truck. Somebody checked in every night, in my voice, from my tower, long after I was gone. And here is the part I asked her, the part I had to know, and wish I had not. I said, Reyes, That last stretch, did I ever sound off to you? Did I ever sound wrong?" And she was quiet a second, and then she said, "No, 9. You sounded fine. You sounded better, actually, those last couple weeks. You sounded," and she looked for the word, "you sounded like yourself again. Whatever was bugging you earlier in the summer," she said, "sounded like you finally worked it out. You sounded happy." And that is the part I have never been able to square, the part that is worse than any of the rest of it. The thing that sounded happy to Reyes on those nightly checks was calling in from the Cutter Ridge Tower, from the mountain I had come down off of weeks before. At the same hour, it was 3 hours away in Bristol with the kitchen light on, paying my electric bill. It was in 2 places. It had been in 2 places the whole time, and I had been too busy being afraid of one of them to count. I do not know how many of me there are out there now. I stopped trying to count them the way I stopped doing a lot of things. I said, "That's good. Thank you, Reyes." And I hung up, and I sat there a long time, because there it was, the whole thing, in 6 words from a dispatcher who meant them kind. It had worked it out. It had sounded happy. Of course it had. It had gotten what it spent all summer building toward. It got to be me, and I got to go home, and I got to sleeve the tower first, the way I never could, and the thing that had been keeping me up on that mountain all summer, the loneliness, the wanting, the specific starved want of a man that nothing had wanted since his wife died, all of that had gone home to Bristol in my body, and it was apparently finally happy. I was the only one left up there wanting anything. And I had come down the mountain into a world where my own name already belonged to someone else, and every night now, wherever I am, I keep the rule the way I kept it up there, the one that saved me right up until it did not. I do not call first. When the phone rings late, I do not answer it. When somebody says my name across a room, I do not turn around right away. I wait. I make them say it again. I make sure it is a stranger's voice and not my own. Answer, do not call. It is a small thing to live by. It is not much of a life. But it is mine, or it is what is left of mine, and I am going to hold on to it, because somewhere out there is a man with my face who is very good at getting people to come down and see, and he is happy, and he is patient, and he has all the time in the world, and he already knows every word I have ever said. Story 2. Grid. Count off, I said. And this time the number came back wrong again, and I stood there in the wet dark with 6 headlamps pointed at my face, and understood that I was going to have to decide, right then, whether to tell 7 grown people that there were 8 of us. We were 9, counting me. That was the number that had left the trailhead. I had signed us out myself on the incident form, printed the names, drawn the little line under them, 9 souls into the flat laurel drainage at last light to find a lost boy. And now I stood in a clearing at something like 2 in the morning with the fog coming up around our knees. And I called the count the way you are trained to call it, the way I had called it every hour on the hour all night. And the voices came back around the circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then a beat, and then 8, and then a longer beat. The beat where the last voice should have said 9 and closed the circle. And instead there was a silence where 9 went, and then somebody, I could not tell who, said 10. 10. We were 9, and an hour ago, on the last count, we had been 8. I need to slow down. If I do not slow down, you will not believe the part that matters, and the part that matters is not the number. The number is where it ends up. But it starts somewhere ordinary, the way these things do, the way they always do, with a phone call and a form and a boy who did not come home. My name is Russ Kettner. At the time of this, I was 54 years old, and I had been a backcountry ranger in that district for going on 19 years. And before that, I had done 8 years of search and rescue as a volunteer down in the flatland counties. So call it 27 years of walking into the woods after people who walked into the woods and did not walk out. That is a specific job, and it does a specific thing to you. Most people, when they think about a lost hiker, they think about the lost hiker. I think about the searchers. because in 27 years I have lost exactly one person on a search, and it was not the person we were searching for. And I will get to that, because it turns out to be the whole thing. But I did not know that yet. Standing in the clearing, counting to 10, I ought to tell you a little about myself before the boy. Because the king rule of these things, if there is one, is that you have to care about the man before you care about what happens to him. And I am the man. So here is the man. I was widowed young, like a lot of us up here. My wife Lorene gone to a bad heart at 41. And I did not have children. And after she died, the searches became the thing I had instead of a family. That sounds grim, and it was not. Not entirely. There is a thing that happens on a search that happens nowhere else in ordinary life, which is that a group of near strangers becomes, for one night, wholly responsible for each other. Every one of them holding the others in their attention, nobody expendable, nobody alone. And I got something from that I did not get anywhere else after Lorraine. And I think that is why I stayed on the team long past the age. Most men hang it up. I liked being 9 people who would not leave each other in the dark. That was the whole of my church, and I was good at it. I say that not to boast, but because it matters to the shape of what happened, that I was not a careless man, not a green man, not a man prone to spooking. In 19 years as a district ranger and 8 before that as a volunteer, I had brought hundreds of people down off that mountain, the living and the dead and the merely embarrassed, and I had kept every searcher I ever walked in with, everyone except Odell Pruitt. And Odell Pruitt was the crack that ran through the whole foundation of me, the one file I could not close, the one shoulder I did not bring down. You do not carry a thing like that for 7 years without it changing how you count. After Odell, I counted my people the way a nervous man checks a stove he has already checked, too much, out loud, again and again. My teams learned to expect it, and some of them thought it was a tick, an old man's superstition, and let them think it. It was not superstition. It was the only prayer I had left, and I said it every hour, on every search, out loud, in numbers. Please God, let them all be here. 1, Fry. 2, Absher. Please let me not lose another one. The night I am telling you about, I did lose another one. Just not one of mine. And the arithmetic of how that happened is the thing I have spent the years since trying to make come out even, and it never does, because it already did, up on the mountain, in the dark, and even is exactly the problem. Here's how the night started. It started at about 7 in the evening with a call to the district office from a woman named Carla Deal, who said her son had not come back. The boy was named Aaron Deal. He was 19. He had gone up into the flat laurel drainage that morning to fish a stretch of the creek he liked, a day hike, nothing serious, and he had told his mother he would be home by dark. And dark had come, and he had not. And his truck was still at the trailhead where he had left it, and she had driven up to check. His phone went straight to voicemail. There is no signal in that drainage. There has never been signal in that drainage. Now, a 19-year-old who is 2 hours late off a fishing hole is not usually anything. 9 times out of 10, they lost track of time, or they hiked out a different trailhead and caught a ride, or they are sitting somewhere with a girl and their phone is off on purpose. You do not scramble a full team for 2 hours late. But there were 2 things about it that made me go. One was that Aaron Deal's truck was still at the trailhead, which meant wherever he was still up in there on foot. And the other was that a weather system was coming, a cold front with rain behind it, due in around midnight, and the temperature was going to drop into the 40s with the wet. And a 19-year-old in a wet cotton shirt in the 40s overnight is a hypothermia case waiting to happen. So I made the call, I paged the team. Let me tell you who came, because you need to know them, or you need to know that I thought I knew them, which turns out to be a different thing. There was me. There was my second, a woman named Dana Fry, who had been on the team 11 years and was better at it than I was. and we both knew it, and neither of us ever said it. There was a fellow named Coy Absher, a big, slow, careful man who ran the canine end, though his dog was old that year and we did not bring her out in the wet. There was a young guy, Trent, first real season, eager, the kind who has not yet learned that the woods do not care how bad you want it. There was a married pair, the Hoskins, Bill and Peg, retired school teachers who had done volunteer search work for 20 years and were as steady as anybody I ever walked with. And there was Harlan Stiltner, a wiry old logger turned trail crew who knew that country as well as I did and had been on more searches than he could count. That is 7. And there were 2 more who met us at the trailhead. Sheriff's Auxiliary, sent up when we called the county for extra bodies, and I did not know those 2 well. A lean man named Ferris, and a quiet one whose name on the form was Galt. 9 total. I signed us out, 9 names, 9 into the drainage. And I will tell you now, because I have gone over it 10,000 times, that I counted the names twice at the trailhead before we went in. Twice. Because that is the discipline, that is the one thing that keeps a search from becoming its own emergency. You account for your people. You never lose track of the number. A searcher lost is worse than the subject lost, because now you have 2 problems, and one of them is your fault. 9 names. I counted them under the sodium light at the trailhead with the rain not yet started, and I got 9 both times, and I put us into the woods. The flat laurel drainage is a bad piece of ground to search, and I knew it going in. It is not big, but it folds. That is the word we used for it, folded ground. It is a maze of little parallel ridges, and the creek braids through the bottom in a dozen channels, and the laurel grows in thickets so dense you cannot walk through them. You have to go around, and every thicket looks like every other thicket, and the ridges all run the same direction, so you lose your sense of which one you are on. And in the fog, at night, with a rain coming, it is the kind of place where a competent searcher can get turned around inside of an hour and not know it. So we did it by the book. We set a base at the trailhead with the Hoskins truck and its radio, and we ran a grid. You may not know what a grid search is, so I will tell you fast because the shape of it matters later. You take your searchers and you space them out in a line, an arm's length or 2 apart, close enough to see each other's lights, and you walk the line abreast across the search area, slow, calling the subject's name, sweeping. When you reach the far edge, you shift the whole line over by its width and walk back the other way, up and back, mowing the lawn, we called it, so that every square foot of ground passes under somebody's eyes and their light. It is slow, and it is boring, and it works. And the one absolute rule of it, the rule Dana drilled into every new person, the rule I had lived by for 27 years, was keep your neighbor's light in view. You keep the light of the searcher on either side of you in view at all times. Because the moment you cannot see your neighbor's light, the line is broken. And a broken line means a gap, and a gap means you just walked a lane nobody swept. And it also means, and this is the part that keeps you honest, it also means you might be the one who is lost and does not know it yet. About an hour in, we found the first real sign, and it did the thing signs do on a search. It lifted everybody, and then it turned into something else. It was Coy who found it, or his light did. A fishing creel, one of those old wicker ones with a leather strap, hung on a laurel branch at about chest height, right at the edge of a thicket, and inside it a folded rain shell and a little box of flies and a sandwich still in its wax paper, uneaten. Arundel's mother had told the district her boy carried an old wicker creel that had been his grandfather's, and here it was. And for about 10 minutes that creel was the best thing any of us had ever seen, because a boy does not walk away from his grandfather's creel and his lunch, which meant he was close, which meant he had set it down to scramble after a fish or to take a leak or to look at something. And we were going to find him just past the next thicket, cold and embarrassed and fine. I marked the spot. That is procedure. You flag a find. You get its position. You do not move it in case it becomes evidence. and I tied a strip of orange flagging to the branch above the creel, and I shot the bearing and marked it on my map. And we spread back out and pushed on past the thicket, calling his name, sure now, energized. And we did not find him past the thicket. We did not find him anywhere in the next hour, and the lift went out of everybody the way it does, and we settled back into the grind. Here is the part that I set aside at the time and could not set aside later. 2 hours after that, working a lane I was dead certain was new ground. 100 and some yards uphill and east of the creel, my own light found a creel hung on a laurel branch at chest height, wicker, leather strap, rain shell and fly box, and a sandwich in wax paper inside, and an orange flag tied to the branch above it. My orange flag, the one I had tied 2 hours ago and 100 yards away, on ground we had already walked, ground the whole line had already swept, and here it was again, in front of me, on ground I would have sworn on my life we had never touched. Same creel, same flag, moved, or the mountain moved us. I could not tell you which, and I have decided the question does not have an answer that would help me. I did not tell the team I took the flag down. I do not know why I took it down, except that I could not stand to have it out there in the dark, my own mark on a thing that was in 2 places, and I put it in my pocket, and I have it still. A strip of orange flagging tape in a drawer at home, and some nights I take it out and look at it the way you look at a thing that proves you are not crazy and wish you were. So we kept walking the grid, and I made myself treat it as an ordinary miserable search, because the alternative was to stop and think about a creel in 2 places, and a stopped searcher is a useless searcher. The rain came in a little after midnight, a cold steady soak, and we called Aaron Deal's name into the laurel and got nothing back but our own voices in the creek. Every hour, on the hour, I called the count. That is the other discipline. On a night search, you count your people every hour, out loud, a roll call, so that if anybody has drifted or fallen or gotten turned around, you know it inside of 60 minutes and not at dawn when you come out short. Every hour I called count off, and the numbers came back around the line, 1 through 9. Dana always taking 1 because she anchored the left end, and me taking 9 because I anchored the right. And in between the count would run down the line in the dark, each light saying its number, and it would close on me, 9, and I would say, good, moving, and we would walk. Midnight count, 9. 1 o'clock count, 9. And then the 2 o'clock count came back, 8. 8 is a normal kind of wrong. That is what I want you to understand about how this crept up on me. 8 on a night search is a thing that happens, and it does not mean anything supernatural. It means somebody has drifted out of the line, and you stop and you find them and you close the line back up. When the 2 o'clock count came back 8, my stomach dropped, the ordinary way it drops, the professional way, the oh hell we have a straggler way, and I did what you do. I called a halt. I said, hold your positions, lights up, and I walked the line. It was Trent, the young guy. He had followed a game trail off to the side without realizing it, chasing what he thought was a sign, a scuff in the mud he took for a boot print, and he had gotten maybe 40 yards off the line into the laurel and lost sight of his neighbor's light, and kept going the wrong way, the way they always do. Sure, he was still on line, and when I found him with my light, he was standing in a thicket, looking around with that particular look a person gets when the woods have quietly rotated underneath them, and they have just now noticed. I brought him back. I put him between me and the Hoskins where I could keep an eye on him. I gave the little speech. Keep your neighbor's light. I do not care what you see in the mud. You keep the light. And I called the count again to close it out, and it came back 9, and we moved on, and I did not think another thing about it, because that is search. That is a normal Tuesday. Green searcher drifts, and you reel him in. So when the 3 o'clock count came back 10, my first thought was not fear. My first thought was that I had miscounted, or that somebody had answered twice, doubled up on a number for a joke, which green searchers sometimes do to break the tension, and which I do not allow. My first thought was ordinary and irritated. I said, "Somebody's off. Count again. Slow. One at a time. And say your name after your number." And I did it deliberately, name after number, because names do not double up the way numbers can in the dark. And it came around the line. Dana said, 1, Fry. Then 2, Absher, Coy's big flat voice. Then 3, Hoskins, Bill. Then 4, Hoskins, Peg. Then 5, Trent. Then Harlan's dry rasp. 6, Stiltner. Then Ferris, the auxiliary man. 7, Ferris. Then the quiet one, Low. 8, Galt. And that was everybody. That was the 8 bodies between Dana and me. Dana at 1, me at 9, and the 7 of them strung out in between, which is 8, and I made 9. That is the whole team. That is everybody who signed out. And my own turn came, and I said 9 Kettner to close it, the way I always did. And then, after me, after the count should have been closed, out of the dark, past my right shoulder, from the direction of no searcher, because I was the right anchor. There was nobody past me on the right. That was the edge of the line. Out of that dark, a voice said, 10. That brings us back to where I started. Me in the clearing, deciding whether to say it out loud. And here is what I decided. I decided not to. Because I am the incident commander on that mountain. I am the one whose job it is to keep 7 other people from panicking in the dark in a rainstorm 2 miles from the nearest road. And the surest way to turn a hard night into a disaster is to stand up in front of your team at 3 in the morning and tell them there is an extra person in the line that none of you can see. So I did the thing a leader does, which is I ate it. I said, all right, we've got to echo off the ridge or somebody's doubling, knock it off. We hold the line and we keep moving. Count is 9. Lights front, let's work. And I made my voice flat and bored and certain, the voice that says nothing is wrong, and I watched the lights turn back to the front, and we moved. But I did not believe it was an echo. You do not get an echo that answers with a number that comes next in the sequence. An echo gives you back the last thing said. This had given me the next thing. This had counted itself. And it had counted itself past the edge of the line, on my right, in the dark, where there was no one. And it had waited its turn to do it. It had let the whole real count run first, 1 through 9, and then added itself on the end, 10, politely, the way you raise your hand after the roll is called to say you were here too. Something in that drainage wanted to be counted. That was the thought I had, standing there, and I did not have anywhere to put it, so I walked, and I kept my light on the laurel, and I did the math I did not want to do, which was that at midnight we were 9, and at 2 we were 8, and at 3 we were 10, and none of those numbers had anything to do with the number that left the trailhead, and the only pattern I could find in them was that the woods were keeping their own count, and it did not match mine, and it was climbing. I want to tell you about the last search. I said I would. It matters here. 7 years before that night, in the same district, though not the same drainage, I ran a search for a hiker named Emmett Sizemore. Grown man, experienced, went out solo on an overnight and did not come back, and his wife called it in, and we searched 4 days. 4 days is a long search. By the 4th day, you are not looking for a live man anymore, and everybody knows it, and nobody says it. And on the 3rd night of that search, working a grid much like the Flat Laurel grid, in fog much like that fog, I lost a searcher. His name was Odell Pruitt. He was a volunteer, sheriff's auxiliary, a quiet man I did not know well, sent up from the county to fill out our numbers the same way Ferris and Galt got sent up 7 years later. And on the 3rd night of the Sizemore search, Odell Pruitt was in my grid line, and we ran a count, and it came back short, and I walked the line to find the straggler the way I always do, and I did not find him. Odell Pruitt was not off in the Laurel 40 yards chasing a print. Odell Pruitt was gone. We never found him. We searched 2 more days, not for Emmett Sizemore anymore, but for the man we had lost looking for him, and we never found either one of them, and both of those files are still open in a cabinet in the district office. and I signed both of them. And the searcher I lost is the one line on my whole career I have never been able to walk past. I bring it up because of the incident number. Every search gets a number. It is how the paperwork tracks it. A case number the county assigns when the call comes in, and it goes on every form, and you write it 100 times over the course of a search until it is burned into you. The Sizemore search, the one where I lost Odell Pruitt, had a number, and I knew that number the way you know your own social security number, because I had written it 100 times over 5 days, and then 100 more times over the months of inquiry afterward, when they wanted to know how a ranger with my experience loses a man off a grid line. And when I signed us out at the Flat Laurel Trailhead that night 7 years later, for the deal boy, I wrote the incident number the county had given me on the phone, and I did not look at it, not really, the way you do not really look at a thing you have written 1,000 times. And it was only later, much later, in the clearing, in the fog, with the count coming back 10, that the number surfaced up out of my hand and into my head, and I realized I had seen it before. It was the same number. The county had assigned the deal search the same incident number as the Sizemore search, 7 years apart. Now, a reasonable man has an answer for that, and I was a reasonable man, so I reached for it. Counties reuse case numbers. The format rolls over, the sequence resets on a cycle, a clerk keys it in wrong. There are 100 boring reasons 2 searches 7 years apart might carry the same string of digits, and none of them mean the mountain is folding time up like a road map. I told myself that. I am telling you, I told myself that, so you will know I did not go up that drainage looking for a ghost. I went up looking for a boy, and I did my job, and the reasonable answers ran out on me one at a time, in order, the way they always do, until I was standing in the dark with only the unreasonable one left. The next thing that went was the ground. We were running the grid northeast, up the fall line, the way you do, and after the 3 o'clock count, I put my head down and worked my lane and kept my light on the Hoskins to my left, and did not think about the number 10. And we walked, and we called the deal boy's name, and after a while, maybe 40 minutes, we came up out of a laurel hell into a clearing. A little flat open place with a fire ring in the middle of it, an old one, cold, the rocks furred with wet moss, and a few char-black ends of log fallen in. And I stopped, because I knew that clearing. It was the clearing where I had called the count that came back 10. It was the clearing we had left 40 minutes ago walking uphill, and we had walked uphill the whole time. I had felt the grade in my knees the whole time, up and up, and here it was in front of us again, the same fire ring, the same fallen char, and I put my light on the mud by the ring, and there were our own boot prints in it, 9 sets of them, ours, from 40 minutes back. Dana came down the line to me. She had seen it too. She is too good not to have seen it. She stood next to me and looked at the fire ring, and she said, low, so the others could not hear, Russ. We walked uphill from here. And I said, I know. And she said, you cannot walk uphill from a place and come back down into it. Not in 40 minutes. Not without turning around. And I said, I know, Dana. And she was quiet, and then she said the thing that told me she was as scared as I was, because Dana Fry did not spook. In 11 years, I had never seen her spook, and she said, I have been keeping my compass. We never turned. Bearing held the whole time, northeast the whole time. And she held up her compass in her light, so I could see the needle, and it was pointing where it should point. And we had walked a straight northeast line for 40 minutes up a mountain and arrived back at the place we started 40 minutes lower. And both of those things were true, and they could not both be true. And that is what folded ground means. And I had heard old-timers use the phrase my whole career and thought it was just a name for confusing terrain. And it is not. It is a name for this. For the map lying. For the mountain closing a loop on you that has no business closing. I did not tell the others. I said we were taking a rest and a water break, which is a normal thing to call. and the Hoskins sat down on a log, and Trent stood there vibrating with young man energy, and the two auxiliary men, Ferris and Galt, stood a little apart, the way people do who came up with a different outfit. And I pulled Dana aside, and I made a decision, and the decision was that we were going to work our way back to the trailhead quietly, without calling it a retreat, because you do not tell a team you are running from something you cannot name at 3:30 in the morning. We would say the weather had turned too bad to search safe, which was even true. The rain was coming harder, and we would come back at first light with more people and a helicopter if the county would give us one. That was the plan. Get my 9 out, get my 9 down the mountain, and come back for the boy when the sun was up and the ground held still. I called the count before we moved, because you always count before you move, and it came back 11. 11. And I looked around that fire ring at the faces in the lamplight, and I counted them with my own eyes, one time, slow, the way you count money. Dana, Coy, Bill, Peg, Trent, Harlan, Ferris, and the quiet one, Galt, at the edge of the ring with his hood up, where I had kept him all night without once putting my light square on his face, though I could not have told you then why I kept doing that. And me. That is 9 in the light. My 9, 7 faces I knew, and 2 county men and myself, every one a body throwing a shadow on the wet ground in the lamplight. 9. The right number. The number that signed out. And the count in the dark had said 11. So where were the other 2? They were not in the light. That is the thing. When I counted with my eyes in the clearing, everyone I could see, I got 9, my 9, all present, all accounted for. But when I called the count in the dark, the count said 11. The extra voices did not have faces at the fire ring. They only had numbers, and they only spoke in the dark stretches of the line where a light was not pointed, and they only spoke after the real count had run, adding themselves onto the tail of it. 9, 10, 11 patient, waiting their turn, joining on. And I understood then, standing at that fire ring, the thing the whole night had been trying to make me understand, and it came to me all at once and cold. The extra count was not one thing. It was people. It was searchers. The 8 that first night, the 10, now the 11, that was not a monster adding itself to my line. That was a line of the lost joining onto my line, one at a time, out in the dark, past the reach of the lights, taking their numbers, answering the roll, because they were still searching. They had never stopped. Whatever the mountain was, it did not kill the people it took off a grid. It kept them searching. It folded them into the ground and left them walking their lane forever, calling a name into the laurel, keeping their neighbors light in view, and when a live search came through their piece of the drainage, they fell in, they joined the line, they answered the count. Glad, I think, God help me, I think, they were glad of the company, glad to be counted, because being counted is the thing a lost searcher wants more than anything. Being counted means somebody knows you are there. Being counted means you have not been given up on. And out there in the folded dark, they had been uncounted for a long, long time. Odell Pruitt was out there. That was my next thought, and it near about put me on my knees. 7 years I had carried losing Odell Pruitt. 7 years I had told myself he had fallen in a hole or drowned in a braid of the creek, or walked out and started a new life. All the stories you tell yourself. So the open file does not eat you. And here was the true story, the one I had never let myself think, which was that Odell Pruitt was still on the Sizemore search. He had never come off the grid. He was still walking his lane in the folded dark with his light up and Emmett Sizemore's name in his mouth. 7 years. And the reason the deal search carried the Sizemore incident number was that to the mountain, it was not a different search. It was the same search. It had never closed. I had signed the Sizemore file closed on paper, but the mountain does not read paper. And up in the folded ground, the search Odell Pruitt was on and the search I was on that night were one search. The same grid, folded together across 7 years. and my live line and his lost line were mowing the same lawn, and every hour our counts were bleeding into each other. Now I have to tell you the rule, because everything I did from that fire ring on was about the rule, and the rule is why I came down the mountain and other men did not. The rule was, never let the count come back wrong twice. I had lived by it for 27 years without ever once saying it out loud. The way you live by a thing your body learned before your head did. When the count comes back wrong, you stop. You find the reason. You walk the line, you find your straggler, you fix the number, and you do not move one step further until the count comes back right. One wrong count is a problem. One wrong count is a straggler in the laurel, and you go get him. But you never ever let a wrong count stand and keep walking. You never accept it. Because a count is not just a tally, a count is a claim. A count is you saying out loud to the mountain, this is how many of us there are, and we are all accounted for. And if you say a wrong number and then say it again, if you let the wrong number ride, you have told the mountain that the wrong number is the true one. You have signed for it, and the mountain will hold you to what you signed for. That is what happened to Odell Pruitt. I know it now. The third night of the Sizemore search, the night I lost him, the count came back short, and I walked the line to find the straggler, same as always, and I did not find him, and it was late, and we were exhausted. 4 days in, and the weather was turning, and I made the one mistake I have never made before or since. I let it stand. I told myself we had miscounted, that Odell had probably already walked out to base and forgotten to tell us that the short count was the error and the search was fine. And I called the count one more time to confirm we were all there, and it came back short again, and I let that stand too. I said, all right, everybody accounted for, and we kept walking. 2 wrong counts. I let the count come back wrong twice, and I signed for it. And by signing for it, I told the mountain that Odell Pruitt was not one of us, that our number did not include him, that he was off the roll. And the mountain took me at my word, and kept him. I did not lose Odell Pruitt to a hole or a creek. I lost him to a number I said twice. And here I was, 7 years later, in the same folded dark, and the count was coming back wrong, and it was climbing, and every instinct in a tired man at 3:30 in the morning was to let it ride, to say, it is an echo, it is the ridge, it is the extra volunteers doubling up, and keep walking to get it over with. That is the trap. That is exactly the trap that got Odell. The mountain does not grab you. It waits for you to get tired enough to accept a wrong number, and then it counts you into the wrong number, and once you are in the wrong count, you are one of the lost, and you fall into the folded line and you walk your lane forever waiting for somebody to count you right again. So I did not let it stand. That was the whole fight, right there, and it did not look like a fight. It looked like an exhausted ranger being stubborn about arithmetic. I stood at that fire ring and I said, out loud, hard, into the dark, the count is 9. 9 of us walked in and 9 of us are walking out, and every one of the rest of you is not on this line. You are not counted. I am not counting you. I said it to the dark past the lights, to the voices that had been joining on. I am sorry, I said, and I meant it. I have never meant anything more, because I knew who was out there. I am sorry, but you are not on my roll tonight. I have 9. I am bringing 9 down. Do not answer my count. Then I got them moving. I did it careful. I did not run them, because a running team is a team that breaks apart in the dark, and a team that breaks apart is a team that comes down short. I told them the search was suspended for weather, which was true. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and the creek was rising, and we could hear it. And I said we were walking out to the trailhead in a tight column. Not a grid, a column. Everybody keeping a hand on the pack of the person in front of them, nobody more than an arm's length from the next body. And I put Dana on point with the compass, because she was the best navigator I had, and I took the tail where I could see all 9 of us at once, and I told them we were going to count as we walked. Not every hour. Constant. I said, we are going to count off over and over the whole way down, and I do not care how foolish it feels. You say your number when it comes to you, and you say it loud, And if the count ever comes back anything but 9, we stop right there, and we do not move until it comes back 9. They thought I had lost it a little. I could see it in the Hoskins' faces, that careful patience you show a man who has gone strange. But they were good people, and they trusted me, and a tired, scared team is glad to have somebody tell them exactly what to do, so they did it. We started down out of the folded ground in a tight column in the pouring rain, with a hand on each other's packs, counting off over and over: 1 Fry, 2 Absher, 3 Hoskins, 4 Hoskins, 5 Trent, 6 Stiltner, 7 Ferris, 8 Galt, 9 Kettner, and again, a chain of 9 numbers passed hand over hand down the mountain in the dark. There was a bad stretch about halfway down where I almost lost Trent, and it happened so fast and so quiet that it taught me more about how the mountain takes people than the whole rest of the night put together. We were in a column, hands on packs, counting, and we crossed a little side drainage where the footing went to slick rock and roots, and the line bunched and stretched the way a line does on bad footing. And Trent, who was 5th, reached out for a handhold, and his hand came off the pack in front of him for a second, 1 second, and in that second the fog came between him and the person ahead, and he took 1 step, toward a light he thought was the column, and was not, because there was a light down in that side drainage, low and warm, and a little off to the side, exactly where a searcher's headlamp would be if a searcher had drifted. And it was not one of us, and Trent, green, tired, took a step toward it the way a moth does. And I saw his light swing offline, and I did not think. I just said his name. Hard, Trent, and grabbed the back of his pack and hauled. And I called the count right then, out of order. Off the clock. Count off. Now. And it came around: 1 Fry, 2 Absher, 3 Hoskins, 4 Hoskins, 5 Trent. And when Trent said 5, when I heard his voice say his own number in his own scared voice, I about sat down in the creek with relief. Because for 1 second there I had felt the whole thing tip, felt how easy it would be. 1 hand off a pack, 1 step toward a warm light, and gone, folded in, on the grid forever. And the count comes back short, and a tired man lets it stand, and that is a whole life ended in the time it takes to reach for a root. I kept my hand knotted in the back of Trent's pack the rest of the way down. He is a good ranger now, years on. He does not remember it the way I remember it. I have never told him how close the light was. And the dark tried to get in. I will not draw it out. You know the shape of it by now. Every so often, in a stretch where the column strung out a little, where somebody's hand slipped off the pack in front of them and a gap opened, a voice would come in on the count. We would go 8 Galt, 9 Kettner, and then in the gap before Dana started the next round with 1 Fry, a 10th voice would slide in, 10, soft, hopeful, and once, God, once, in a voice I knew, in a voice I had spent 7 years trying to forget. A voice said, 10, Pruitt, taking a name and a number, answering the roll the way he had 100 times on the Sizemore search. Glad to be counted, and every hair on my body stood up, and I stopped the column dead in the rain, and I said, the count is 9. Say it back to me. The count is 9. And I made them say it, all 9. I made them say 9, and I said into the dark, level as I could hold it, Odell. Odell, you are not on my roll tonight. I already lost you once. I am not counting you into this one. Stand down. And there was a silence, and then the 10th voice did not come again, and we walked. And I do not know to this day if what I felt in that silence was the mountain letting go, or the mountain agreeing to a trade I had not understood I was making. We came down out of the drainage right at first light, that gray drowned first light with the rain finally easing, and the trailhead came up out of the murk with the Hoskins truck sitting where we left it and the sodium light still burning over the sign-in board. And I have never been so glad to see a gravel parking lot in my life. And at the edge of it, at the boundary, at the exact line where the trail meets the lot, I stopped the column one more time, and I counted us out, one at a time, by name, As each person crossed the line out of the trees and into the lot, I counted them, and I touched each one on the shoulder as they crossed. A real hand on a real shoulder. Because I was not going to trust my ears anymore, only my hand. Dana crossed. 1. My hand on her wet shoulder. Solid. Coy. 2. Bill. 3. Peg. 4. Trent. 5. Harlan. 6. Ferris. 7. Galt. 8. And me. 9. Stepping across last out of the trees. 9 shoulders under my hand. 9 people out of the woods. The count came right. The count came 9. I had held it. I had brought my 9 down. It was only later that I understood the count had been lying to me the whole night, and it had not been lying by being too high. It had been lying by being 9 at all. We did not find Aaron Deal. I want to say that plainly because everything else in this is strange, and that part is not strange. That part is just terrible. We went back up at full light with fresh people and a county helicopter and dogs, and we searched the Flat Laurel drainage for 6 days, and we never found him. Not his body, not his gear, not his fishing rod, nothing. His truck sat at that trailhead for a week, until his mother came and drove it home. Aaron Deal walked up into that drainage to fish a creek on a bright morning, and the mountain closed over him and did not give him back, and his file's open in the district office to this day, right next to the Sizemore file, and I signed them both. Here is the part I put together after, in the weeks after. When I could not sleep and I went into the records, because a man like me deals with a thing he cannot understand by going into the records, by trying to make the paperwork tell him what the mountain would not. I went to close out the deal search paperwork, and I needed the roster, the sign-out sheet, the one I had filled in myself at the trailhead in my own hand, 9 names. And I sat with it under the office light, and I read the 9 names. And 8 of them were my people. People I could call on the phone, people I had known for years. Fry and Absher and the Hoskins and Trent and Stiltner and Ferris. Ferris checked out. Ferris was on the county auxiliary roster, badge number and all, a real man who had gone home to his family, and I had shaken his hand. There was no Galt. I called the county. I said I needed to confirm the auxiliary volunteers dispatched to the deal search. I was closing out the file, and the dispatcher pulled it and read me back the names of everyone the county had sent up that night, and she read me Ferris, and she stopped, and I said, "And who else?" And she said, "That's it. Russ. Just the one. We only sent you the one auxiliary that night. Short-handed. Just Ferris." I said, "Are you sure? I signed out 2. I have 2 auxiliary on my sheet." And she said, "I don't know what to tell you. We only had the one to send. There's no Galt on our rolls. There's never been a Galt on our rolls." I had counted 9 at the trailhead. Twice. Under the light, before we went in, I had counted 9, and I had been right. There were 9 bodies standing in that lot. I would swear it in any court. 9 people went up that mountain. And one of them was not real. One of them was never on any roster, was never dispatched by anyone. Walked up out of the dark to a search sign-in board and stood in my line and let me count him, and took a number and a name he made up on the spot. Galt, and walked the whole grid with us, quiet, at the far end of the line, and walked back down with us, in the tight column with my own hand on his shoulder at the boundary, solid, a real shoulder, and got in a vehicle in that gray dawn and drove away, and I have never found him, and I never will, because there is nothing to find. Because he was already found 7 years ago on a search I ran and never let go of. I know who Galt was. I have known since the county dispatcher said there's never been a Galt. I did not let myself look at him full on the whole night, not once. Some animal part of me knew not to, kept my light off his face, and only at the very end, at the boundary, when I put my hand on his shoulder to count him out. 8. I looked, one time, in that gray light, and I have spent every night since trying to convince myself I did not see what I saw. And I did see it. Under the hood of that borrowed auxiliary rain jacket was Odell Pruitt's face. Not older, not 7 years older. The same face, the same quiet, wet in the rain, looking back at me, and he gave me a small nod. The nod one searcher gives another at the end of a long night. We brought them down, boss. And then I blinked the rain out of my eyes, and it was just a man in a hood, a stranger, Galt, and he crossed the line into the lot and was gone. And I understood the trade. It took me weeks to let myself understand it, but I understand it now. I held the count at 9. I never let it come back wrong twice. That is the rule, and the rule works. The rule is, why not one of my living people walked into the folded ground that night? Why the Hoskins are home and Dana is still my second. And Trent learned the lesson young and lived to learn it. I brought 9 down, but the count was already wrong when I signed it at the trailhead. Wrong in the one way I could not see, because the mountain had already seated one of its own in my line before I ever counted. And when I fought all night to keep the count at 9 and bring 9 down, I was fighting to bring Odell Pruitt down. I was counting him right at last, 7 years late, giving him the number I owed him, walking him out of the folded ground I had left him in. I got Odell out, my hand on his shoulder at the boundary. 9. But the count has to balance. That is the thing about the count. The thing I gave 27 years to and only understood that night. The mountain runs a count too, and the mountain's count is always right. And if I walked one of the lost out into the living world, then the count is short by 1 up in the folded dark. And it does not stay short. It takes its number back. Somewhere in the flat laurel drainage, in the rain, before first light, while I was fighting to hold my line at 9, the mountain reached out and took Aaron Deal and folded him into the ground and put him on the grid with a light in his hand and a name in his mouth, and made him the 10th, made him the one that answers out of the dark now, made him the straggler that some ranger 7 years from now, or 70, will hear join his count in the fog and refuse, the way I refused, the way you have to refuse. I traded them. I did not mean to, but the count balanced. It always balances. I brought my 9 down, and the mountain kept its 9 up, and one of my 9 had been dead 7 years, and one of the mountain's 9 had been alive that morning and had a mother waiting at the trailhead. I went further into the records than I should have. Once you start, you cannot stop, and I had questions the living could not answer, so I went to the dead paper, the old files in the bottom cabinets that nobody had opened in decades, the searches from before my time. And I found the thing I was half looking for and wholly afraid of. It was not the first time. The Sizemore search in which I lost Odell Pruitt 7 years before the Deal search, that was not the beginning of it either. I found a case from the early 1980s. Same district, a different drainage, but the same folded kind of ground. A hunter gone missing. And in the file, in the incident summary written in some long retired ranger's cramped hand, a note that on the 3rd night of it a volunteer had become separated and was not recovered, and the volunteer's name was underlined twice, the way you underline a thing that has stopped making sense to you. And I sat there in the records room and I did the arithmetic on the dates, and the years between that search and the Sizemore search were the same as the years between the Sizemore search and the Deal search. 7 years. And 7 years, and I do not think that is the mountain being tidy. I think that is how long it takes the count up there to come due again. How long the folded line walks before it needs another number to answer the roll. And if that is right, if the interval holds, then I have a few years yet before it comes for another one. And I have already decided that when it does, I am going to be the ranger who signs that search out, because I know the rule now, and I would rather it be me at the count than some young ranger who has never heard a dead man take a number in the fog. Dana knows. I never told her all of it, but Dana Fry is too good not to have worked most of it out on her own, and about a month after, she came and sat in my office and did not say anything for a while, and then she said, "We brought 9 down, Russ." And I said, "We did." And she said, "But we only had 8, didn't we?" And I looked at her, and she looked at me, and neither of us said the 9th name, and neither of us has ever said it since, and she still runs searches with me, and she keeps the count on the left end of the line the way she has for 11 years, and she never lets it come back wrong twice either. and that is the closest thing to comfort I have, that there are two of us now who know. The deal file is open, the Sizemore file is open. They sit in the same cabinet, and I put a hand on that cabinet sometimes when I pass it. I do not know why, the way you touch a stone. Arundel's mother still calls the district twice a year, on his birthday and at the start of fishing season, and asks if there is anything new, and there is never anything new. And I take those calls myself, because I will not make anyone else take them. And I tell her we have not stopped, which is not a lie, because I have not stopped. I hear her boy on the grid in the fog, and I will hear him the rest of my life, and I will never once tell her that, because there is no version of it that is a mercy. I still run searches. That is the part people do not understand. You would think I would have quit, but somebody has to know the rule, and there is nobody left who knows it the way I do, and every search I run, I keep the count out loud every hour, and I never let it come back wrong twice, and I bring my people down. And every so often, in the fog, on a bad grid, a voice joins my count out of the dark, past the anchor, glad, hopeful, taking a number. Sometimes it is a voice I do not know. And once, last fall, on a search 2 ridges over from Flat Laurel, in the small hours, a voice joined my count out of the dark and took the number 10. And it was young, and it said a name after its number, the way I taught my people to, and the name it said was Deal. I did not answer it. I held my count. I brought my people down, but I heard him. He is out there now, on the grid, searching, and he is being counted by something that is not me, and the only mercy in it, the only thing I can hold on to at 3 in the morning, is that he is not uncounted. Whatever else is true, he is not alone out there, and he is not uncounted, because up in the folded dark of that mountain there is a long line of them, all the ones we ever lost, walking abreast with their lights up, keeping each other's light in view, calling names into the laurel, and they answer the roll every hour, all of them, glad, and the count up there is always growing, and it is always, always right. I keep the orange flag in the drawer and the number in my head, and on the bad nights I take the flag out and I count out loud in the dark of my own kitchen, the way I count on the mountain, and I get to 9 and I stop, and I make myself stop, because the one thing I have learned that I would hand to anybody who has to walk into folded ground after me is this: the count will try to go past 9. It will always try to go past 9. There is always one more voice in the dark that wants a number, and it will be patient, and it will wait its turn, and it will sound like somebody you failed. Do not give it the number. Bring your people down. Keep the flag. And whatever you do, whatever it costs you, do not ever, not once, let the count come back wrong twice. Story 3. Register. The register was open on my knee in the headlamp light, and my own name was written in it, in my own hand, on a page I had not signed, and the ink was still wet enough to smear when I touched it. I want to be careful here. I want to get the order of it right, because the order is the whole thing. I had walked into the Sawyer Gap shelter about an hour after dark, cold and beat, at the end of a 14-mile day, and I had done what I always did first, before I even dropped my pack, which was take the logbook down off its nail and check it, because checking the logbooks was my job. It was the whole reason I walked that circuit. And I had opened it to the last written page, and there, at the bottom, under a couple of ordinary hiker entries from that afternoon, was a line in a hand I knew better than any hand in the world, because it was mine. It said the date, that day's date. It said the shelter, Sawyer Gap. And where a man signs his name, it said Aldous Renner, which is my name, my whole real name, the name I had not written in a trail register in 19 years. The name I had trained myself out of writing, the way you train yourself, out of a bad habit, deliberately, daily, for 19 years. And it was wet. I touched it, and it smeared, and I looked at my own finger with a blue smear of ink on it, and the shelter was empty, and I was the only person who had walked in, and I had not written it. And it was ink. I need you to hold on to that, because it is the first thing that was truly impossible, and I nearly walked right past it. A shelter register hangs on a nail with a pencil on a string. Always has a pencil, because a pencil writes in the wet and the cold and does not freeze and does not run out, and every soul who ever signed that book, every hiker, every ranger, me for 19 years, signed it in pencil. Nobody carries a pen up onto that trail. There was no pen within a hard day's walk of where I was sitting. And my true name was written in the book in wet blue ink, in my own hand, in a shelter I had walked into alone with a pencil on a string swinging from its nail beside the page. That is the detail I keep coming back to. Not that the name was mine, that the name was written in a thing that did not exist on that mountain. That is where it starts to matter, that I explain the rule, and the man who taught it to me, and why I had gone 19 years without once signing my own name. My name, like I said, is Aldous Renner. Most people call me Al. I was 59 years old the autumn this happened, and I had been a backcountry ranger for a long stretch of the southern Appalachians for going on 30 years. And for the last 19 of those years, my main job, my particular job, the thing that was mine and nobody else's, was the shelter circuit. There is a section of the trail up there, a long one, better than 100 miles of it, dotted with trail shelters, the three-sided log or stone lean-tos that thru-hikers sleep in, spaced a day's walk apart, and each one has a logbook, a register, just a cheap spiral notebook or a bound composition book in a zip bag, hung on a nail, and hikers sign them. They write the date and their trail name and a little note. Saw a bear, my feet are killing me, halfway to Maine, that kind of thing. The registers are half guest book and half bulletin board and half safety record. And yes, I know that is three halves. That is the kind of thing the registers are. My job was to walk the circuit on a loop, shelter to shelter, all season, and maintain them. Swap out a full logbook for a fresh one, carry the full ones back to be archived, keep them dry, replace the pencil on its string, and read them. That last part was the real part. I read every register on every pass, cover to cover, because the registers are how you find out what is happening on your section of trail without being everywhere at once. A hiker writes that the spring at Cold Branch is dry, to tell people to carry extra water. A hiker writes that a bear got their food bag at Sawyer Gap. You have a problem, bear. Somebody signs in at one shelter, and their people report them overdue, and you can go back through the registers and trace where they were and when. The register is the trail talking to itself. 19 years I read that conversation, shelter after shelter, 100 miles of it, on a loop, and I knew those books the way a mailman knows a route. I should tell you why a man takes a job like that, alone. 100 miles of trail and nobody on it but him, because it matters to what the horror turned out to be. I was not always alone. I had a wife once, a long time back, a good one, named Ruth. And we did not have children. We tried and it did not come. And then Ruth got sick the way people get sick, slow and then fast. And by the time I was 40, I was a widower with a paid-off truck and a job I could do in my sleep, and nobody in the world who needed me to come home at night. And I found out a thing about myself then that I am not proud of, which is that I could not stand to be around people who had what I had lost. I could not sit in a break room and listen to a man complain about his kids. So I took the loneliest job the forest had, and I told everybody it was because I loved the quiet, and that was half true, and the other half, the half I did not say, was that a man alone on a trail does not have to watch other people have the life that got taken from him. And here is the thing I understand now that I did not understand then, the thing that makes this my story, and not just any keeper's story. The worst part of losing Ruth was not the grief. The worst part came later, a couple of years on, when I realized that outside of me there was almost nobody left who knew her, who carried her, who could say her name and mean the whole person. Her people were gone or scattered, and I understood that when I went, Ruth would go too, all the way. The last account of her closed, and it terrified me in a way I could not explain to anyone, the idea of a person just ending, unremembered, uncounted, their name in no book anywhere. I did not know, when I took the keeper's job, that I was walking straight into the one job in the world built entirely around that fear. A job that is nothing but names and books, and the thing in the dark that reads them, and the terrible mercy that out here, at least on this trail, nobody is ever unremembered. Everybody's name is in a book. Everybody is accounted for. That should have comforted me. By the end, it was the most frightening thing about the whole business, because I learned what it costs to be the one name that is never allowed to close. The man who had the job before me was named Del Rey, and Del Rey is the one who taught me the rule, and I need to tell you about him because everything that happened is downstream of him. Del trained me for one season before he retired or before he did whatever he did, and I will get to which. He was an old man even then, lean and slow and quiet, with a way of looking at the woods like he was listening to it more than looking at it. He walked the circuit with me that whole first season, teaching me the shelters, the springs, the water sources, the trouble spots, the mileages. And on about the third or fourth shelter of that first loop, when I went to sign the register the way any new hiker or ranger signs a register, to leave my mark, Aldous Renner, Ranger, checking the log, Del put his hand flat on the page before my pencil touched it. "Not your name," he said. "Never your real name. Not in the books." I laughed, I think. I asked him what he meant. And Del did not laugh. He took the pencil out of my hand, gentle, and he wrote a name in the register himself in the ranger line, and the name he wrote was Halloran. Just Halloran, no first name. And he said, "You sign Halloran. Every book, every time, for as long as you have this job. You sign Halloran, and you never once sign Aldous Renner, not in a shelter register, not anywhere on this trail. You understand me?" I did not understand him. I thought it was an old man's superstition, and I said something like that, halfway to a joke, and Del looked at me with those listening eyes, and he said the only thing he ever said to me that scared me. Back then, before I had any reason to be scared, he said, "The books get read, not just by us. Something out here reads the books, Al. It reads them every night. And it comes for the freshest true name it finds. So you don't give it yours. You give it Halloran, 'cause Halloran's already spoken for. You sign Halloran and it turns the page and moves on and it never learns you were here at all." I want to be honest about how I took that, 'cause it is the honest part that makes the rest of it land. I thought Del Rey was a little cracked. I did not think it unkindly. 30 years alone on a trail will put a crack in anybody, and old rangers are famous for their private rituals, the things they do that they cannot explain, and I filed Halloran under that. A harmless tick of a lonely old man. But here's the thing about a harmless tick. It costs nothing to humor it. It cost me nothing to write Halloran instead of Renner. So I did it that first season to please him, the way you go along with an old man you have come to love. Because I had come to love Del Rey by the end of that season. He was the closest thing to a father I had left. And by the time he retired at the end of that first year, signing Halloran had become a habit in my hand. And a habit in the hand does not need a reason. And so I kept doing it after he was gone, year after year. Halloran, 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 100 shelters, a loop, a dozen loops a season, 19 years. And I never thought hard about it again, until the autumn my own name showed up wet in the Sawyer Gap book. Let me tell you what happened to Del Rey, 'cause it is short, and it is the first loose thread, and it never got tied. Del retired at the end of that season, or that was the plan, and there was a little send-off for him at the district office, a cake, a card, and he shook my hand and told me to mind the books. And then he went home to a little place he had up a hollow, and about 3 weeks later, deep into the off-season, he walked back out onto the trail. Nobody knows why. His truck was found at a trailhead, one of ours, one on my circuit, and Del Rey walked up onto that trail in the middle of November. an old retired man with no reason to be out there, and he did not come back. They searched. Of course they searched. I searched. I walked every shelter on the circuit in the snow, calling his name, and we never found him. Not a boot, not a pack, nothing. And after a while, they wrote it up the way they write up a old man who walks into the winter woods, which is to say, they wrote it up sad and simple: disorientation, exposure. The mountains keep a few every year. And I believed that mostly for 19 years. I let myself believe it because the other thing Dell had told me, the something reads the books, I had filed that under cracked, and you cannot unfile a thing like that just because the man who said it walked off into the snow. Or you can, but not yet. Not for 19 more years. So now you know the rule and the man it came from. And I can tell you about the autumn. It stopped being a habit and started being the only thing standing between me and whatever Dell had been trying to warn me about. It began the way these things begin, with a thing so small I almost did not see it. It was early October, the start of the southbound season's tail end, the last of the thru-hikers pushing for Georgia before the cold. And I was doing a loop, and I was doing the thing I do, reading the registers. And at a shelter called Piney Knob, I read an entry that stopped my pencil. It was a signature, a hiker signature, up near the top of a fresh page, dated a week before. And I knew the handwriting, not a hiker's handwriting. I knew it the way I knew my own, because in a sense it was a hand I had been reading for 19 years, and it took me a long moment to place why it was wrong, and then I placed it. It was Del Rey's hand. The particular way he crossed his sevens with a little downstroke, the way he made a capital that leaned back instead of forward. Del Rey's handwriting in a shelter register, dated the week before, 19 years after Del Rey walked into the snow and did not come back. The name it signed was not Del Rey. The name it signed was Halloran. Now I told myself a reasonable thing, because I am a reasonable man mostly, and the reasonable thing was this. I had signed Halloran in that book myself, probably, on my last loop, and I was misremembering. An old man's eyes in a headlamp, seeing Dell's hand in my own, because I had learned to sign from watching Dell. That is a real thing. Handwriting is learned by imitation. Mine probably did carry a ghost of his. I told myself that, and I mostly believed it. And I turned the page and went on, and that would have been the end of it. Except that over the next 3 shelters, I started paying attention, and I started to see it everywhere. And once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. The registers were full of Halloran. Of course they were. I had been signing Halloran for 19 years. The archived books were nothing but Halloran. But the Hallorans were not all in my hand. I sat down that night at Cold Branch Shelter with a stack of the current books and the last few years of archives I happened to be carrying back, and I laid them out in the headlamp and I went through them. And I made myself look, really look, at the Halloran signatures, and they were not all mine. Some were Dell's hand, unmistakable, 7s and all, and not just from Dell's years, but from years after he was gone. And some were in a hand that was neither mine nor Dell's, an older hand, a spidery, careful, old-fashioned hand, the kind of penmanship they beat into school children a century ago. And that hand signed Halloran too, in books from before Dell's time, in books from before my time, in the oldest archives, going back and back, decade on decade, the same name, Halloran, in a rotating cast of hands, each hand handing off to the next. And every single ranger who had ever walked this circuit, I understood, sitting there in the cold, had signed that same false name, had been taught the same rule, had humored the same old superstition, all the way back to a hand so old and so faded I could barely read it, and every one of them had signed Halloran, and not one of them, in 100 years of registers, had ever once signed his own true name, except that somebody just had, in the Sawyer Gap book, in my hand, my true name, wet on the page. But I am getting ahead of myself. because Sawyer Gap came later, and I need you to feel the season the way I felt it, one turn of the screw at a time. The next turn was the check-ins with no checkout. I need to explain a small thing about how the registers work as a safety record, because the whole weight of the next part depends on it. When a hiker signs a shelter register, that is a check-in. It says, "I was here on this date." And the way a ranger reads the trail through the books is by tracking a hiker's check-ins from shelter to shelter, south to north, or north to south, a day's walk apart, a chain of signatures marching up the trail. You can watch a hiker move through your section over a week just by their signatures: Piney Knob on Monday, Cold Branch on Tuesday, Sawyer Gap on Wednesday, and so on. The chain climbing the trail one shelter a day. And when a hiker walks off the end of your section, their chain of signatures just stops because they have left your books behind and started signing books farther up the trail in some other ranger's section. That is normal. That is a check-in with no checkout, and it means nothing. It means the hiker walked on out of your world and into the next, alive and fine. But there is another kind of check-in with no checkout, and it is the kind that used to keep the old rangers up at night in the days before radios and helicopters. And it is a chain of hiker's signatures that climbs the trail shelter by shelter, and then one day stops in the middle of your section, signs in at Cold Branch, signs in at Sawyer Gap, and then nothing, no signature at the next shelter or the one after, though the trail goes on and the hiker had every reason to. A chain that stops in the middle, not at the edge. That is the bad kind. That is a hiker who checked in and never checked out of your section, not because they walked on, but because somewhere between Sawyer Gap and the next shelter, the chain of them ended. That is how you used to find out somebody was in trouble. A gap in the books where a signature should be. So, that October, reading the registers on my loop, I started finding chains that stopped in the middle, and not new ones, old ones. I would be reading an archived book, tracing signatures out of professional habit, and I would find a hiker's chain climbing the trail, Piney Knob, Cold Branch, Sawyer Gap, and then stopping, no next signature. A chain ended in the middle of the section, and I would think, and check the date, and it would be from years ago, and I would think, well, that is a hiker who died out here years ago, or quit and hitched home from Sawyer Gap, and either way it is old news, nothing for me to do. And I found one, and then I found another, and then once I was looking I found dozens, and they had a pattern, and the pattern was the thing that finally got the cold up my spine and kept it there for the rest of the season. Every one of the broken chains, every hiker whose signatures climbed the trail and then stopped in the middle of my section, stopped at the same shelter, Sawyer Gap. Every one, going back decades. A hiker would sign in at the shelters leading up to Sawyer Gap, a nice ordinary chain of a person walking north, and they would sign the Sawyer Gap register, and then the chain would end. No signature at the next shelter up. Not one of them, in decades of books, had ever signed in at the shelter past Sawyer Gap. They all stopped there. They all checked in at Sawyer Gap and never checked out. And here is the part that made me set the books down and sit dead still in the dark. It was not that they died at Sawyer Gap, or vanished at Sawyer Gap, or quit at Sawyer Gap, because I would have known. A hiker dying or vanishing on my section is a search, a report, a family, a file, and I would have known about every one of them, and I did not. There were no searches, no reports, no missing hiker files that matched these broken chains. These were not people who had been reported missing. These were people whose signatures simply stopped at Sawyer Gap and who, as far as the world outside the registers was concerned, had walked on and finished their hike and gone home and gotten on with their lives. The world had no gap where these people should be. Only the books had a gap. Only the books knew that something about them ended at Sawyer Gap, quietly, with no fuss, no search, no grieving family, the person walking out of the registers and seemingly on with an ordinary life, except that some essential accounting of them, the part the books keep, had stopped at Sawyer Gap and never started again. I met a kid that season. I have to tell about the kid because the kid is the reason I understand this the way I understand it now, and because the kid is one of the things I carry. It was about a week before Sawyer Gap at Cold Branch, one of the rare nights I was not alone in a shelter. There was a southbound thru-hiker already there when I walked in near dark. A young guy, maybe 23, 24, trail name Paperback, because he carried a beat-up paperback western in his pack and read it by headlamp every night, which is a foolish thing to carry the weight of on a thru-hike, and which told me everything good I needed to know about him. We split the shelter and made our suppers on our little stoves and talked the easy talk of two people who will never see each other again. Where are you from? How are your feet? Seen any bears? He was from Ohio. He had quit a job he hated to walk to Georgia. He had a mother who worried and a girl who did not wait, and he told me both of those things, the way young men tell a stranger on a trail, the things they cannot tell anyone at home, and I liked him, and I have thought about him every day since, and I watched him sign the register. He took it down off the nail before he turned in, and he signed it the way hikers sign, his trail name and the date and a little note, and then, because he was the friendly sort, he held the pencil out to me and said, "You gonna sign, Ranger?" And I said, "Already did," which was a lie. I had not signed yet. I was going to sign after he slept, because I did not want to explain to a friendly kid from Ohio why the ranger signs a name that is not his own. And he shrugged and hung the book back up and read his western and went to sleep, and after he was asleep I took the book down and I signed Halloran, careful, deliberate, and I looked at his entry above mine, his real trail name, and under it he had done the thing a lot of them do, the thing the registers ask for on the inside cover, in case of emergency. He had written his real name too, his true name, small, in parentheses, a kid being responsible, so that if anything happened to Paperback out here, somebody would know who to call in Ohio. His true name, fresh, in the book, and I looked at it a long time, and I did not know yet what I know now, and I did not cross it out, because I did not yet understand that I could have, that I should have, that a keeper crossing out a true name and writing Halloran over it is not defacing a hiker's entry. It is the only thing a keeper is really for. I found his chain 3 shelters later. Paperback, southbound, a clean chain of his trail name marching down the trail, Cold Branch, then the next shelter, then Sawyer Gap, and then nothing. His chain ended at Sawyer Gap. No signature at the shelter past it, though he was strong and southbound and had every reason to walk on to Georgia and his mother and his ordinary life. It just stopped. And there is no missing hiker file for a kid named Paperback from Ohio. I checked hard. There is no search, no report, nothing. The world has no gap where he should be. His mother has not called anyone. As far as the daylight world is concerned, that young man walked on to Georgia and finished his hike and went home. Only the book knows different. Only the book knows his chain ended at Sawyer Gap the same week I did not cross out his true name, and I will carry that the rest of my life, however long the rest of my life turns out to be, because I could have signed Halloran over his name and I did not, because I did not yet believe, and a keeper who does not believe is just an old man defacing guest books, and a keeper who believes too late is something worse. I started signing Halloran with more care after that. That is a strange sentence, but I mean it exactly. For 19 years, Halloran had been a habit, a scribble, a thing my hand did while my mind was on the weather. Now, every shelter, I wrote it slow and deliberate, the way you say a prayer you have only just started meaning. And I would look at Dell's Hallorans and the old spidery Hallorans, and I would try to make mine match, try to sign it the way it had always been signed, as if the important thing was that the name looked continuous, unbroken, one long Halloran running back 100 years, and I did not fully know why I was doing it, only that Dell's voice had come back to me across 19 years. You signed Halloran because Halloran's already spoken for, and for the first time in my life I was afraid of what would happen if I did not, because the books had started to notice me. That is the turn I can least explain and least forget. About the middle of that October, on a loop, I began to find entries that were about the Ranger, not signed by me. About me. In that older, spidery hand, the oldest hand, the one from the bottom of the archives, fresh entries appearing in the current books, and they were short, and they tracked me. That piney knob and the spidery hand dated the day I had been there. The keeper came through today, signed Halloran, like a good one. At Cold Branch. 3 days later, the day after I had slept there, the keeper is on his loop. He sleeps at Cold Branch on the odd weeks. He is getting old. And at a shelter called Rock House, the day I read it, fresh, the ink barely dry in that 100-year-old hand, the keeper is reading the books now. He has started to understand. It will not be long. I want you to understand that I was alone when I read these. That is the thing about the shelter circuit. You are always alone. That is the job. 100 miles of trail, and you the only ranger on it. Days between seeing another human face. There was no one to show the entries to. There was no one to say, look at this, tell me I am not losing my mind. There was only me, and the headlamp, and the book on my knee, and a hand from 100 years ago writing about me in the present tense, tracking my loop, knowing which weeks I slept at Cold Branch, watching me start to understand, and telling me, in that patient dead schoolteacher hand, that it would not be long. And I knew, the way you know a thing in your body before your mind will say it, I knew what shelter it was all pointing toward, because a keeper on my loop, doing the circuit the way I did it, the way Dell had taught me, hits the shelters in an order, and the order that October was going to bring me in about a week, on schedule, to Sawyer Gap. The shelter where all the chains ended. The shelter I had been reading about all season without letting myself say it. Something wanted me at Sawyer Gap, and it had known for weeks I was coming, because I come every year, on a loop, on a schedule, predictable as the mail, and it had simply looked up from the books and seen the keeper coming around again the way it had seen every keeper come around for 100 years, and it had started to write me down. There was a night 2 shelters out from Sawyer Gap when I nearly saw it happen. I had gone to sleep with the register in my pack instead of on its nail, some animal instinct telling me to keep the book close, and I woke in the dead middle of the night the way you wake when something is wrong. No sound, just the wrongness, and I lay still in my bag and I did not turn on my light. And there was a sound in the shelter, a small sound, a particular dry whisper of a pencil moving on paper, slow, careful, the sound a person makes signing their name when they are being neat about it. And it was coming from my pack, from inside my clothes pack where the register was, and there was no one in the shelter but me. And I lay there in the dark and listened to something write in a book, zipped inside the pack under my head, unhurried, taking its time, the way you write a name you have written a great many times and mean to get right. I did not turn on the light. I have thought 1,000 times about whether if I had shown my headlamp on my pack in that second I would have seen the thing that reads the books, seen it caught in the act with a pencil in whatever it has for a hand. And I truly think, that not turning on that light is the second thing I did right, after signing Halloran, because I have come to believe that seeing it is another way of being read by it, that the looking goes both directions, and a keeper who lets himself see the thing at Sawyer Gap has as good as signed his name. So I lay in the black and listened to it finish, listened to the little dry whisper of the pencil stop, listened to the quiet come back, and in the morning, I took the register out of my pack with hands that did not want to open it, and I turned to the last page, and there, under my Halloran from the evening before, in my own hand, was Aldous Renner, and the date and it was not wet anymore. It had been written in the night and had time to dry. And I crossed it out and wrote Halloran over it, and I did not sleep in a shelter again without the book on its nail across the room, where at least I would have to watch it walk to reach me. I thought about not going. I want that on the record, too, the same as the other men in these things never seemed to consider it, but I considered it. I am not a brave man. I am a careful man, which is a different thing, and the careful thing, the sane thing, was to break my loop, walk out to the nearest trailhead, drive to the district office and tell somebody. But tell them what? That the logbooks were writing about me, that a name I had signed for 19 years belonged to a dead man who was already spoken for, that I was afraid to sleep at a trail shelter because hikers' signatures stopped there in books from before I was born. I had spent 19 years being the reasonable one, the one who filed Dell under cracked, and now I was going to walk into the district office and hand them a stack of composition books and say something reads these at night. I knew exactly how that goes. It goes the way it went for Dell, more or less. An old man who spent too long alone on a trail and started seeing things in the woods, handled gently, retired early, watched, and maybe that was all it was. I still could not rule out, even then, that I was simply an old man coming apart the way old men on that trail come apart. So I did the thing I have decided I will never forgive myself for, or the thing that saved my life, and I still do not know which, and I went to Sawyer Gap on schedule, because part of me had to know, and part of me still thought I might be crazy, and a crazy man can walk into a shelter to prove to himself the book will be blank. It was not blank. You already know that. That is where I started. I walked into Sawyer Gap about an hour after dark at the end of a 14-mile day, and I took the register down off its nail, and I opened it to the last page, and there, under the ordinary hiker entries, was my own true name, Aldous Renner, in my own hand, dated that day, wet in ink. I did not write it. I need to say that as many times as it takes. My hand was dry. My pencil was in my pack. I had not touched that book until I took it off the nail 30 seconds before, and the name was wet, which means it had been written minutes before I walked in my hand, by something that could write in my hand, in a shelter I was walking into alone in the dark. And it had signed me in. It had checked me in. Aldous Renner, Sawyer Gap, this date, check in. And I stood there in the headlamp with the wet smear of my own name on my finger, and I understood finally, completely, the thing Dell had been trying to tell me 19 years ago. And the thing every keeper for 100 years had known and passed down as a rule, with the reason filed off, so it could be carried, and it was this. The books get read. Something reads them every night, and it comes for the freshest true name it finds. And tonight, at Sawyer Gap, for the first time in 19 years, the freshest true name in the book was mine. Here is what I did, and it is the only thing I did right that whole night, and I did it on instinct, out of 19 years of a habit that turned out to be the only thing keeping me alive. I took my pencil out of my pack. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped it twice, and I drew a line through my own name. One flat line through Aldous Renner, crossing it out, and under it, in the ranger line, slow and deliberate, and meaning it the way you mean a prayer at the end of your rope, I wrote Halloran. I gave it Halloran. I took my true name off the page, the freshest true name in the book, and I put the spoken for name over it. And then I sat down against the back wall of that shelter with the register on my knees and my back to the logs, and I did not sleep, and I waited to find out if it had worked, if turning my name into Halloran had turned it away. And outside the shelter the woods were quiet, the specific listening quiet. And once, late, I heard something come up to the shelter, up close, right at the open front of it where the fourth wall would be if a shelter had a fourth wall, and stand there, and I did not raise my headlamp. I kept it off. I kept my eyes on the black square of the opening, and I did not look for the thing that was standing in it, because some old animal part of me knew that being seen looking was a kind of signing too. and I held my true name behind my teeth and did not say it, did not even think it too loud, and after a while the thing at the front of the shelter turned the page, so to speak, and moved on, and the quiet changed, and I knew I had bought one more night the way every keeper before me had bought one more night with a dead man's name. I have to tell you about the rest of that night, because it was the longest night of my life, and it is where I learned what the thing wanted, which is not a thing I can prove, only a thing I came to know sitting against those logs with the register on my knees. It did not leave after the first pass. That is what I had hoped, that it had come up to the front of the shelter, read Halloran over my crossed-out name, and moved on down the trail for good, the way Dell said it turns the page. But it came back. 3 times that night, maybe 4. I lost count. The quiet would change. In that way I had learned to feel more than hear. The woods going from ordinary night quiet to that other quiet. The listening quiet, the quiet of a room when someone has come into it behind you, and I would know it was at the front of the shelter again, standing where the fourth wall should be, close, patient, and I would keep my headlamp off, and my eyes on the black square of the opening, and my true name locked up behind my teeth. I did not look at it. I want to be clear that I never once saw it, that whole night, because I never let myself look, and I have come to believe that not looking is the other half of the rule Dell never got around to teaching me. You do not sign your true name, and you do not look at the thing that reads for it, because looking is a kind of answering. Looking says, "Here I am," and a keeper's whole craft is to be the one man on the trail who is never quite here. But I heard it. I heard it the way you hear a person standing in a doorway breathing, except it was not breathing, it was drier and worse than breathing. A sound like a hand turning pages, a dry riffling sound, close, at the front of the shelter, in the dark, going through the pages, and I understood after a while that the sound was the sound of it reading. It had come up to the shelter, and it was reading the register, the book that was in my lap, reading it from wherever it stood without ever coming close enough to touch, riffling through the pages of a book that was not in its hands because the book was in my lap, and looking for the freshest true name, and finding Halloran, my crossed-out runner with Halloran laid over it, Halloran on every ranger line going back 100 years, and each time it got to the end of what it could read, it would stop, and the riffling would stop, and there would be a silence that had a question in it. And I would sit very still inside that question with my name behind my teeth, and after a while it would turn away, and the quiet would change back, and I would breathe. Toward the end of the night, in the worst of the dark, the hour when a man's defenses are thinnest, it did a new thing, and it is the thing I have never told anyone, and it is the reason I keep my headlamp off in shelters to this day. It spoke, or something like speaking. Out of the front of the shelter, low, in the dry riffling, almost, voice of a thing that has only ever learned language from the inside of composition books, it said a name. It said, Aldous. Just my first name, my true first name. The front half of the name it had written wet in the book, the name I had crossed out. It said Aldous. Soft, like a question, like a man reading a signature he is not sure he can make out, testing whether the name would answer to itself. And every animal thing in me wanted to answer. That is the part nobody understands who has not sat in that dark. When a thing says your true name in the middle of the night in a voice made of the trail itself, some part of you, some deep, exhausted, lonely part, wants nothing in the world so much as to say, yes, here, that is me. Because being named is being known. And a man who has walked 100 miles of trail alone for 19 years is so hungry to be known that he will nearly answer his own death for it. I did not answer. I bit down on the meat of my own hand until it bled, the way I had, and I did not say yes, and I did not say here, and I did not even let myself think the word that is my name. And after a long time the thing at the front of the shelter stopped saying Aldous and turned away, and the quiet changed, and I had bought the night, but it knew my first name now. It had learned to say it, and a thing that can say the front half of your name is a thing that is learning the rest. And when the gray came, when it was light enough that I trusted the day the way you trust the day after a night like that. I did the thing that answered the last question and asked a worse one. I went through the Sawyer Gap shelter looking for the oldest book, because it had come to me in the night, sitting there against the logs, that Sawyer Gap was where the chains ended. Sawyer Gap was where it read. Sawyer Gap was the shelter it favored. And a shelter like that would have books, old books, the oldest books, the ones nobody had thought to archive because nobody opened a register that old. And I wanted to know one thing before I left that place, maybe forever. I wanted to know who Halloran was. I found it wrapped in oilcloth up in the rafters, back in the dark peak of the roof where the log walls met. A book so old the cover had gone to felt, and the pages were the color of weak tea. And it was a register, the first register, the Sawyer Gap register from back when this was barely a trail at all, and the dates in it, when I could read them, ran back better than 100 years. And I sat in the gray morning light with that book, and I read it from the front, and I found Halloran, and I found out what Dell had never told me, what maybe Dell never knew, what maybe no keeper since the first had known, because the reason had been filed off the rule so many hands ago. Halloran was a real man. That was the first thing, and somehow it was the worst thing, because I had signed a real man's name 100,000 times, without ever once thinking he had been a person. His full name was in the front of that first book, in that spidery old hand I had been finding all season, the oldest hand, and it was his own hand, because Halloran had been the first keeper of these shelters, the first man to walk this circuit and mind these books. Back when the books were new and the trail was a line somebody had just finished cutting through the mountains. And Halloran had figured it out. He was the one who figured it out. You could follow it through his entries, the slow dawning of it across a couple of seasons. A careful old man reading his registers and noticing, the way I had noticed, that hikers' chains ended at Sawyer Gap, that something read the books, that it came for the freshest true name. He worked it out alone, the way I had worked it out alone. 100 years apart, the same man really, the keeper, whoever the keeper happens to be. And when Halloran understood it, when he understood that the thing was going to keep coming for the freshest true name in the book, night after night, hiker after hiker, forever, a slow, quiet harvest that no search would ever find, because the books were the only witness, Halloran did a thing that I do not have a word for, except the words that are too big to say out loud. He gave it himself. On purpose. Forever. He started signing his own true name. Not to check in and check out like a hiker passing through. He signed himself in his real name, Halloran, at Sawyer Gap, and he never signed himself out, and then he did it again the next night and the next. And he wrote in the book what he was doing and why in that careful schoolteacher hand, and I read it in the gray morning 100 years later, and I have it close to word for word because I read it over and over before I could make myself believe it. He wrote that the thing wanted the freshest true name, and so he would give it one, his own, every night, so that his would always be the freshest, so that it would always find him first, and never have to turn the page to the hikers behind him. He wrote that a keeper's job was to keep the trail, and there was no keeping the trail that mattered more than this. He wrote that he was old and had no family, and the trail was his life, and he would rather give it to the thing than let it take one more kid walking north with his whole life ahead of him. And he wrote, at the end, the line that turned the whole rule inside out for me, the line that made me understand what I had been doing for 19 years without knowing it. He wrote, after me, the keepers must not sign their true names. They must sign mine. Let it keep finding Halloran. Let it think Halloran is all there ever is. I will be the freshest name forever. Tell them to sign Halloran, and do not tell them why, because a man who knows why might not do it, and it only works if they do it. I sat with that a long time in the gray light. Do not tell them why, because a man who knows why might not do it. And I understood that Dell had done exactly what Halloran asked. Dell had handed me the rule with the reason filed off, sign Halloran, never your real name, and he had not told me why, and I had thought that was because Dell himself did not know why, an old man passing on a superstition he had inherited, But that was not it. Dell knew why. Dell had to have known why, because of what Dell did next, 3 weeks after he retired. And I finally understood it sitting in that shelter, and it put a grief in me I have not been able to set down since. Del Rey did not get disoriented in the November woods. Del Rey walked back out onto that trail on purpose, an old man with no family and the trail for a life, and he went to Sawyer Gap, and he did what Halloran did. He started signing his true name. He gave the thing a second permanent account, a fresh one, because Halloran had been the freshest name for 100 years, and 100 years is a long time. And I think even a sacrifice like Halloran's wears thin, that the thing had started over the decades to look past Halloran for something newer, and Dell knew it. Dell read the books the way I read them. Dell saw the chain starting to end at Sawyer Gap again in his last years, and Dell did the math a keeper does. And Dell went out into the snow to lay his own true name down on top of Halloran's, so there would be two of them holding the line, two permanent accounts, two of the oldest and freshest names, so that the hikers and the next keeper, me, would be safe a while longer. That is why Dell's hand keeps showing up in the books after he was gone. Dell is not gone. Dell is at Sawyer Gap every night, signing himself in next to Halloran, the two of them the freshest true names in the book forever, so that mine never had to be. And now mine had been. That is what the wet name meant. That is what all of it meant, the entries tracking me. The keeper is reading the books now. It will not be long. It meant the line Dell laid down was wearing thin in its turn. It meant that after 19 years, the thing had gotten tired of Halloran and tired of Dell and had started reaching past them for the newest true name on the circuit, which was mine, which had never been in the books because I had signed Halloran for 19 years, and so the thing had done a new thing, a thing I do not think it had ever had to do before. It had written my true name itself, in my own hand, to check me in, because I would not check myself in. It had learned to sign the keeper. The trick was failing. For the first time in 100 years, the freshest name defense that Halloran built with his own life was failing, and it was failing on my watch. And there is only one way a keeper fixes it, and I knew what it was, sitting in that shelter, because Halloran had written it and Dell had done it. You go out and you lay your own true name down on top of theirs. You become the freshest name forever. You relieve them the way you relieve a man who has stood a post too long. I did not do it. I want you to know that. And I want you to know that not doing it is not the same as being brave. It might be the opposite. And I have not decided. I put the oldest book back in its oilcloth in the rafters. I put the current book back on its nail, with my true name crossed out and Halloran written over it, the way I had left it in the night. And I shouldered my pack and I walked out of Sawyer Gap in the gray morning and I finished my loop, because a keeper finishes his loop. And I signed Halloran at every shelter the rest of the way around, slow, deliberate, meaning it. And I walked out to my truck at the end of it and I drove home. And I did not walk back into the winter woods the way Dell did. I am still here. I did the selfish thing, or the sane thing, and I chose not to lay my name down, not yet, not that autumn. And I have had to live with what that means, which is that the line is thin and I am the one holding it, and I am holding it by not being brave enough to do what Halloran did. Because here is what I know now, walking the circuit still, an old man signing a dead man's name at 100 shelters on a loop. It is getting worse. I find my true name in the books more often now. Not every loop, but often enough. Aldous Renner, wet, in my own hand, at a shelter I have just walked into alone, and every time I cross it out and write Halloran over it and buy another night, and every time the crossing out works a little less well, the way a key works a little less well in a lock that is wearing out. The thing knows my name now. It writes it when I will not. And Dell and Halloran are out there at Sawyer Gap holding the line as best two dead men can, but the line is mine to hold too, and I know it, and the book knows it, and we are all just waiting to see how long I can keep signing somebody else's name over my own before the day comes that I cannot cross it out fast enough. I found an entry on my last loop before the snow that I have not told anyone about, because there is no one to tell. Because the whole ache of this job, the thing that makes it the job it is that you carry it alone. 100 miles of trail, and you, the only keeper on it. It was at Cold Branch, in Dell's hand, and it was fresh, and it was not tracking a hiker, and it was not about the keeper in the third person. It was addressed to me. It said, in Dell's hand, with his backward-leaning capitals and his crossed sevens, "Al, you have held it longer than I did. You are a better keeper than me. But you cannot cross it out forever, son, and when you cannot, do not be afraid. It is not so bad out here. It is just cold and quiet, and you are never uncounted, and there is always somebody who knows your true name. Come to Sawyer Gap when it is time. We will sign you in." I tried to find Halloran in the records. I want to tell you how that went, because it is its own small horror, and it is the last thing I have. I went to the district office in the off-season, and I went into the old personnel files, the deep ones, the boxes in the basement that go back to when the forest was first a forest on paper, and I looked for a keeper named Halloran, the first keeper, the man who cut the deal with his own life, and there was nothing. No Halloran. No personnel record, no pay record, no note of a first keeper of the shelter circuit by that name or any name. The circuit's records simply began, a few decades back, with a man before Dell, and before that man a gap, and before the gap nothing, as if the job had no beginning, as if there had always just been a keeper and no first keeper, no origin, the way a rumor has no first mouth. I sat in that basement with the empty folder where Halloran should have been, and I understood that the daylight world had no record of him either, same as it had no record of paperback, same as it had no gap where the broken chains should be. Halloran had signed himself so completely over to the thing at Sawyer Gap that he had signed himself out of the paper world entirely, out of everything but the one place he chose to remain, the registers, the books, where his name is the freshest name, and always will be. He is not in the personnel files. He is in the only file that matters, the one hung on a nail at Sawyer Gap, and he signs it every night. There is a thing coming that scares me worse than the winter woods, and I will end on it because it is the truest open door I know how to leave you. The district wants to retire the paper registers. It is a modern world, and they have been talking for a couple of years now about putting a little weatherproof electronic thing at each shelter, a box you tap with your phone to check in, cloud-backed, searchable. No more mildewed composition books for an old man to haul around on a loop. They think they are doing me a kindness. They think they are retiring a chore. And I have sat in those meetings, the only keeper in the room, and I have not been able to explain to a single person why the paper registers cannot be retired, why the trick only works on paper, why Halloran needs a book and a nail and a pencil on a string, why 100 years of keeping the trail safe depends on a thing they think is a quaint bit of nostalgia. Because to explain it, I would have to tell them why, and Halloran said do not tell them why, and I have come to understand that he was right, that the rule only holds as long as the reason stays filed off, that the moment you try to explain it to a room of reasonable people, it dies in the air between you, the way it would have died if Dell had explained it to me 30 years ago, instead of just putting his hand on the page and saying, "Not your name." So I do not know how much longer there will be books to sign, and when the books go, when the last paper register comes down off the last nail and gets carried out to be recycled, I do not know what happens to Halloran, or to Dell, or to the thin worn line the two of them are holding at Sawyer Gap. I do not know if the thing that reads the book simply stops, blind, with nothing left to read, or if it learns to read the new thing, the box, the cloud, the searchable database of every true name of every hiker who ever tapped in, a register 1,000 times longer than any book, full of nothing but fresh true names, and no keeper who knows to sign Halloran over a single one of them. I still walk the circuit. I sign Halloran, careful, deliberate, meaning it 100 shelters on a loop. I cross out my own true name when I find it wet in the books, and it works a little less each time. And on the loops, when it has been a bad night, when the crossing out came slow, when I felt the thing at the open front of a shelter turning my name over in whatever it has, instead of hands, I think about Dell's entry at Cold Branch. Come to Sawyer Gap when it is time, we will sign you in. And I think about the kid from Ohio, and I think about the empty folder in the basement. And I understand that there is a version of the end of this where I do the thing Halloran did and Dell did, where I walk out into the snow some November with no reason a search will ever find, and lay my true name down at Sawyer Gap on top of theirs, and become the freshest name forever, so that the kid who has this job after me, whoever that poor soul is, gets to sign a dead man's name for 19 years and never once understand that the dead man is me. They gave me a trainee this past season, a young woman, sharp, good in the woods. The district thinks she might take the circuit when I hang it up, and they had me walk her around a loop to teach her the shelters and the springs and the trouble spots, the way Dell walked me. And on about the third shelter, when she went to sign the register the way any new ranger signs a register, to leave her mark, her own name, her whole real name in a neat young hand. I put my hand flat on the page before her pencil touched it. Not your name, I said, never your real name. Not in the books. You sign Halloran. Every book, every time, for as long as you have this job. And she laughed the way I laughed, and asked me what I meant, and I took the pencil out of her hand, gentle, and I wrote Halloran in the ranger line myself, and I did not tell her why. I could not make myself tell her why. Halloran said, do not tell them, and now I know he was right, and I know something Halloran maybe did not, which is that you also do not tell them, because you cannot. Because to say it out loud to a bright young person on a beautiful morning at the start of her career is a cruelty you find you do not have in you. So I filed the reason off the way it was filed off for me, and I handed her a habit and called it a superstition, and she is signing Halloran now, somewhere on the circuit, in a hand that is starting already to carry a ghost of mine. And I have not decided. That is the truest thing I can leave you with. I have not decided, and every loop I do not decide is a loop. The line holds by a thread, and the thread is my hand, crossing out my own name, and I am 59 years old, and my hand is not as fast as it was, and the ink is always a little wetter than it was the loop before.